The story begins in an icy environment where a huge blizzard was going on, and a large group of people was on a place named the Place of Extinction, which was actually the 8th floor of a tower. All the soldiers were moving in unison, maybe going to conquer this 8th floor of the tower, along with a man wearing a brown, furry long coat and having a muscular build. He stopped all the other soldiers before entering and told them that, as they have gathered today to take down the 8th floor guardian, they should be careful. We come to know that this was a rank 6 Blue Zone guild master named Kazuki Kyojo. Kazuki told everyone that just because it is a joint raid, it does not mean that anyone can slack off, because if they cannot clear this, the 9th floor is nothing but a pipe dream. The soldiers were calmly listening while maintaining formation. But suddenly they cleared the path for someone, and Kazuki was shocked by who had decided to show up. It was a whole team of adventurers who called Kazuki. The team name was Blue Eyes, full of mysterious men and women, and the one leading them was actually wearing a mask that covered his whole face tightly. We come to know that the masked person was the guild master of Blue Eyes named Subaru Narukami. Kazuki was really happy after looking at Subaru, who apologized to his friend for being late. But Kazuki knew that Subaru was actually the first one there, and that his alliance was showing up this time. Kazuki told everyone that Subaru was going to be leading the charge, and everyone else from the Murray Alliance must be looking to pick up the scraps. Hearing of scraps, Subaru took out something from his cloak and gave it to Kazuki. It was a glowing red pendant type of thing. As Kazuki read the description, we come to know that this was a legendary artifact called the Archangel's Blessing, and the system told him that it has a requirement of level 50+, and it instantly recovers 50% of fatigue when fatigue hits 100%, but has one-time use only. Kazuki was shocked by getting such an item, but Subaru told him that he intended for the raid to succeed no matter what. But just in case of something mishappening, he should have a backup plan. Kazuki told Subaru that he was going to need it too, but Subaru changed the topic, asking his friend about whether he wanted to come back to Earth when the battle was over, telling him that he could return the pendant to him back then. Kazuki was almost crying, and Subaru teased him that if he didn't want to come back, he could just keep it. Just then, something towering started to cause a ruckus, and both friends were shocked, turning towards the direction of the sound. Finally, it was the coming of the 8th floor guardian, as Kazuki told everyone to prepare for combat. We come to know that the 8th floor guardian was actually named the Seal Dragon Hydra, which had multiple heads that can tear apart any human being without much effort. Subaru called this monster an ugly bastard, and started using his abilities as he started charging for an attack. The system told him that lightning energy was coursing through his body. We come to know that Subaru was a lightning-type individual, and he was so angry that he was sure that it was the Hydra's day of death. The monster realized the incoming attack and immediately became enraged, opening its mouth and forming a giant energy ball of water energy. Kazuki told everyone to take cover, but Subaru told them that there was no need. He got ready with his sword to intercept this creature of multiple heads. As the attack started coming towards the whole team, Subaru charged and took out his lightning sword. The attack was so powerful that it cut the beam straight from the middle, even surprising the monstrous Hydra that was multiple times bigger than the tiny humans he was facing. This attack surprised even Kazuki, who knew that Subaru always goes overboard. But the whole team was happy that all the training the boy tried paid off. One of the team members also wanted to get the first hit, but he was too late. But a female from the team wondered about what he had handed Kazuki earlier. Subaru just answered that she would find out later, asking the whole team if they were ready because they had to kill that damn sea monster Hydra as the whole team got ready with their powers surging. They knew that they would have to break through this hellish 8th floor. Kazuki watched the scene from behind in silence. Then a sarcastic smile appeared on his face as he muttered about their appearance playing the role of close friends. Meanwhile, the captain of the soldiers confirmed to Kazuki that the troops were positioned as planned. So Kazuki praised his work, suggesting that they start moving as well. His masked assistant responded immediately, wishing him luck and success in the battle. Kazuki's followers moved with suspicious speed, while the healer holding the staff stood in front of him. Chaos erupted, and everyone clashed with the massive dragon that filled the arena with its roars and attacks. The agile female fighter rushed in, scolding her comrades not to spare any energy and to attack with all their might. Then she sliced through the beast's body lightly, describing it as a simple stroll. Meanwhile, the ice mage grumbled about the intensity of the pressure and tension they were experiencing in this battle. Amidst the battle, a warrior surrounded by red energy rushed forward, betting his comrades on who would inflict the most damage on the beast, delivering a powerful and direct blow. Tasha accepted the bet immediately, stipulating that the loser would pay for dinner, and pounced with his sword, slashing the dragon's body at tremendous speed. He cut off one of the dragon's heads with that blow while calling out to Shino, warning her of the dragon's head falling towards her. Shino reassured him as she prepared her spell, asking him not to worry and to continue the attack. Then, she formed a massive pink magical shield to block the dragon's head, saying confidently that defense was her job. At that decisive moment, Kazuki suddenly appeared behind Shino, whispering her name and asking coldly if she could block this too, which struck her with astonishment and shock. Without hesitation, Kazuki plunged his sword into her back, piercing through her chest, commenting with boredom on their overconfidence, which he considered their main problem. Subaru turned in shock to call her name in a trembling voice, unable to believe what he was seeing. Shino fell as a lifeless corpse drenched in her own blood at the feet of Kazuki, who stood with a terrifying smile. The blood-stained Kazuki looked towards Subaru with a crazed smile, calling out to him and telling him that this wasn't the time to look away. Subaru stood stunned, wondering about the reason for Kazuki's betrayal, while the dragon was attacking Subaru, and it ended with an agonizing scream. Subaru thought back to the day strange system messages appeared out of nowhere. They had announced that the tower had chosen them, ordering everyone to climb it and get ready for a new beginning. That was the very first message from the tower, which stood like a giant in the middle of space. No one knew whether this message meant disaster or a hidden opportunity. Even now, people still do not fully understand what it truly meant. But the tower's commands allowed no resistance, so everyone continued climbing, hopping to reach the top, a place no one had ever seen before. People from many different worlds, such as Earth and Murim, all entered the tower with their own goals and burdens. Each of them pushed forward day after day, hopping to survive and complete their missions. But the truth was harsh. Subaru now stood alone in a bloody field, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen companions. The scene looked like a nightmare. Breathing heavily, Subaru stared at the aftermath of the battle. They had just defeated Hydra, the Red Dragon, a creature once believed impossible to kill. He scolded his comrades inside his mind, angry and heartbroken because they ignored his orders to retreat. If they had listened, perhaps they would still be alive. Exhausted, he dropped to the ground in front of the dragon's corpse. Their victory felt empty. He whispered to the lifeless bodies that they were fools for dying without his permission. System alerts suddenly appeared in front of him, warning him that he had been poisoned and could no longer recover naturally. His fatigue level had also risen dangerously close to the limits. Subaru wondered what would happen if he somehow managed to return, especially since the system clearly stated that reaching 100 fatigue meant certain death. Rage and determination lit up in his eyes. At that moment, Kazuki approached him with a cold expression. He mockingly called Subaru Light Lightning Lord. Subaru stared at him in shock, asking why he had chosen to betray him. He demanded a real explanation, shouting in anger. Kazuki stepped closer and said he had been waiting 10 years for this moment. He claimed Subaru, of all people, should understand. With a wicked smile, he admitted that he tricked Subaru on purpose, using the Blue Eyes Guild members as distractions so that they wouldn't interfere. He confessed loudly that everything Subaru had ever done for him had become a source of emotional pain, and that he had finally chosen the world over their friendship. Kazuki then stepped back and pretended to show regret as he declared that this was the end. He pulled out the Archangel's pool and mocked Subaru by saying he no longer needed to return it like they had agreed. He confirmed with Shad and Freuda that the Blue Eyes Guild would completely vanish with Subaru's death. Before leaving, Kazuki coldly told Subaru not to feel sad. History would still remember him as a hero, even though he wouldn't be around to see it. Subaru gave a bloody, sarcastic smile and told Kazuki that he only ever hears what he wants to hear. Subaru knew that surviving was impossible now, but he still refused to die on his knees. He activated the little strength he had left. Kazuki froze in disbelief, screaming at the sight. Subaru slowly stood up again, gripping the legendary LS fan, which could create fierce storms. Subaru swung the fan and refused to explain anything to Kazuki. His shining eyes revealed that he planned to use the fan's remaining 4 charges to change everything. He thought of the 4 surviving guild members behind him. With one powerful strike of the fan, he generated a massive blast of wind that sent them flying far away from the battlefield. He yelled at them to run and survive. Kazuki finally understood Subaru's plan and shouted at his soldiers to chase the survivors immediately. The Murim warriors rushed forward to obey, but Subaru stepped in front of them like an unbreakable wall. He formed a crackling ball of lightning in his hand, forcing them to stop and face him. His fatigue had already reached 95%. Thunder rumbled across the sky, signaling that Subaru's lightning skill was nearing its time limit. A massive pillar of golden lightning struck down, turning the entire battlefield into an electrified storm. Kazuki watched with a nervous smile, calling Subaru stubborn for not giving up. With fatigue hitting 96%, Subaru dashed forward, glowing with a deadly aura. He wondered what reward Kazuki had promised these soldiers to make them fight someone as dangerous as him. Standing before the swarm of enemies, Subaru warned them that the cost of attacking him would be their lives. His eyes glowed, and even though his body was covered in wounds, he declared that no one was allowed to leave without his permission. The soldiers realized there was no escape. Screaming, they charged at him with their weapons. Subaru blocked and countered their attacks skillfully, even though he knew these fighters would normally be too strong to fall easily. His greatest fear was Kazuki interfering, which would end the fight instantly. Still, he felt a bit relieved knowing his comrades had gained enough distance. But the fatigue bar had now reached 97%. He knew he couldn't drag this fight out any longer. With another block, he kept fighting through the pain. The fatigue rose to 98%. A sudden heavy blow knocked him off balance. The soldiers immediately took advantage, surrounding him as their swords struck from every direction. Blood splattered, and their screams filled the air. They soon began celebrating, certain that they had finally killed Subaru Narukami. But then, a voice echoed from within the cloud of dust and blood. Subaru's voice. He asked them calmly who they thought they had just killed. His eyes appeared again, glowing with golden power. Lightning burst out from his body in a violent explosion, electrocuting every soldier around him and flinging them into the air like helpless dolls. The bodies of the fallen attackers collapsed around Subaru, and he finally dropped to his knees, completely drained of strength. The remaining soldiers stepped back in fear, whispering to each other that he was a true monster, someone who fell again and again but simply refused to die. Watching from a distance, Kazuki wore a cold smile and mocked the idea that Subaru's story would end in such an easy way. At that moment, Subaru's fatigue level climbed to 99%, and a bright red warning flashed before him, stating that hitting 100 would mean instant death. Gathering the last traces of his energy, Subaru glared at Kazuki and reminded him that if anyone should know the truth, it was him. Subaru always wins in the end. With a loud shout declaring victory, Subaru hurled his final spear. The weapon, wrapped in fierce lightning, shot forward faster than the eye could follow. Kazuki held the Archangel's blessing artifact in his hand, certain it guaranteed his safety. He even began offering fake condolences to Subaru. But his words died the moment the spear struck the jewel directly, shattering it and destroying his only protection. Subaru's vision dimmed, but he felt satisfied. He didn't need to watch Kazuki die, he already knew he had hit his mark. As darkness swallowed him, Subaru wondered in confusion what awaited him now. Would he be trapped in this empty void forever? A horrible smell suddenly broke through the silence, followed by strange noises. Subaru forced his eyes open and was shocked to find himself stuffed inside a metal garbage bin in a dirty alleyway. He couldn't help but question whether this disgusting place was supposed to be hell. A blue status screen appeared in front of him, displaying a name he didn't recognize, Subaru Hase, Level 1. He stared at it in disbelief. Immediately afterward, fragments of memory returned. In those memories, a group of young men mocked him for being an earthling with weak stats. They looked down on him and laughed, telling him to at least try to be half as impressive as the legendary Subaru Narukami from 20 years earlier. Subaru froze. A voice in his mind told him he had died 2 decades ago. When he looked at a piece of broken glass nearby, he realized with shock that the face staring back at him wasn't his own. Overwhelmed by confusion, he wondered if this entire experience was just a nightmare. He stumbled out of the trash bin in panic, fell to the ground breathing heavily, and spotted a tablet device beside him. It was a player kit. Thinking it might help him understand what had happened, he quickly searched for information about the Blue Eyes Guild. The results said that a group called Blue Zone was now considered its successor, though people questioned why it was so weak despite claiming to follow Subaru Narukami's legacy. While browsing the news, he suddenly froze. He saw a statement issued by Guildmaster Kazuki, who was preparing for the upcoming tournament. Subaru muttered in disbelief. When he looked at the picture attached to the article, he saw Kazuki with an older face and an eye patch. The traitor had survived their final battle. A wave of memories washed over Subaru. He recalled a night long ago when he and Kazuki sat together on the roof of a building. Kazuki had confessed that he wanted to leave the Blue Eyes Guild, saying they had never truly been enemies. Subaru had been shocked by his sudden decision, especially when Kazuki asked him to inform the others on his behalf. Although Subaru had considered him a close friend, Kazuki simply said Subaru would understand the reason someday. He had even promised to remain Subaru's shadow no matter what happened. Yet the irony was bitter. Years later, Kazuki created his own guild, using a name they once joked about together. Returning to the present, Subaru laughed bitterly. This so-called shadow had named his guild Blue Zone, yet after 20 long years, Kazuki was still stuck on the 9th floor. In other words, Kazuki had accomplished nothing. As Subaru walked along the street, still scrolling through the news, he suddenly stopped. A picture of a huge building appeared on the screen, the Subaru Narukami Memorial Hall. The sight stunned him. He immediately headed there to confirm with his own eyes. The building was far grander than anything he had imagined, massive, luxurious, and built with obvious pride. Inside, he found an enormous portrait of himself at the center of the hall. He looked at it with a mix of disbelief and bitterness, confused about why his memory was being displayed in this way. Statues and photos of him lined the hall. Flowery messages spoke of him as a hero, leader of the Blue Eyes Guild, the man who came closest to reaching the top of the tower, an inspiration for future generations. The hall claimed to preserve his legacy and that of his comrades forever. His anger boiled as he watched a recording of Kazuki at the opening ceremony. Wearing a formal suit and a false, respectful smile, Kazuki announced that Subaru and the Blue Eyes Guild were gone, and that only Blue Zone carried forward their noble ideals. Subaru trembled with fury, wanting to shout for Kazuki to stop lying. The hatred burning inside him grew stronger. Kazuki had not been satisfied with killing him. He had used his death, twisted his memory, and turned himself into Subaru's successor. Subaru whispered that he would become the nightmare Kazuki feared most. The video continued. Kazuki claimed Subaru would never return but would always be remembered. Subaru stepped closer to the screen, staring into Kazuki's projected face, and declared firmly that he would rewrite this false history entirely. Subaru stared straight ahead, eyes sharp with determination. He swore that he would never again allow Kazuki to trick him or twist the truth. He would not waste this unexpected second life. While he stood there, lost in thought, a young boy ran into him from behind. The child fell, and Subaru quickly bent down to help him, asking if he was hurt. But the moment the boy lifted his head, Subaru froze, because the child was wearing Subaru's old mask. Before he could say anything, the boy's parents rushed over, calling him Minato and fussing over him. Subaru reassured them that it had only been a light bump, but what really shocked him was what he noticed next. Not just Minato's family, but the entire crowd around him wore the same mask, his mask. Some held it gently in their hands, others wore it with pride, all behaving as though they were part of a sacred ritual. Subaru wiped his face in disbelief. Everywhere he looked, people honored the mask he once used in battle. The memory of Kazuki's mocking words returned, his claim that Subaru would remain an immortal hero even after death. But Subaru now understood the bitter truth. Kazuki had rewritten history. He had turned Subaru's legacy into a twisted legend while hiding the truth of his betrayal. His gaze landed on a massive shrine-like portrait of himself wearing the mask, surrounded by candles and flowers. It looked like a grand funeral offering made for a saint. Subaru clenched his teeth, realizing the entire ceremony was a performance designed by Kazuki to steal Blue Eyes Guild's glory and claim it for himself. Then something unusual caught his eye, a faint blue glow coming from among the flowers. Subaru pushed through the crowd, ignoring the complaints and startled shouts. He shoved forward until he reached the altar. Kneeling down, he picked up a bright blue flower pulsing with weak energy. He recognized it instantly. It belonged to Shiger Asajiri. Meanwhile, on the rooftop of a nearby building overlooking the square, two figures watched the event unfold. Shiger sighed with relief, glad another year had passed without trouble. His companions scoffed, pointing out how reckless they were being. If they had been even slightly late, they would have run into Blue Zone members. She questioned why they kept taking this risk every year just to leave flowers. But Shiger insisted it was necessary, just in case. Looking down at the square, he wished softly that Subaru would someday see the flowers he had been leaving. His companion stared at him seriously and asked whether he truly believed Subaru was still alive. Shiger replied that he could never accept Subaru's death because he had never seen the body. She answered harshly that if Subaru were alive, Kazuki would have captured them long ago, and besides, Subaru would never disappear for 20 years without contacting them. Back on the ground, Subaru hurried out of the memorial, clutching the glowing flower. His heart raced. Now he was certain Shiger was alive. The scene shifted to Subaru's small, dim room. He sat on the bed, scrolling through the tablet and muttering at how poor the original owner of this body had been. His searches yielded nothing about the Blue Eyes Guild, but the flower on his table proved more than any archived record could. Shiger had survived and had been hiding for 2 decades. Subaru knew instantly that Kazuki must have forced them into secrecy. Knowing Kazuki's personality, Subaru was sure he wouldn't allow anyone who knew the truth to remain free. Subaru recalled the explosion from their last battle. He wondered whether Shiger alone had survived, or if the fierce winds he created that day had saved all 4 survivors. But contacting them now was impossible. As long as Kazuki controlled everything, reaching out would be suicide. He stared out of the window, admitting to himself how weak he currently was. He couldn't confront Kazuki, couldn't protect anyone, and couldn't even reveal his identity. First, he had to regain his strength. That was the only path forward. With Subaru Hase's memories guiding him, 2 days passed as he prepared. Then the preliminary training for new players began. Subaru stood with a sword in hand, studying the blade with determined eyes. He told himself that survival came first, because if they were all alive, he would meet his comrades again. The scene shifted to the test arena, a grand hall built like a Roman Colosseum. Supervisor Hugo watched the participants with boredom and annoyance. One trainee had just defeated a monster and was gasping for breath. Hugo commented coldly that he barely managed it and asked if he wished to try the next level. A system window explained that each stage added 1 more goblin but increased rewards as well. The participants screamed in fear and refused. 3 goblins seemed impossible to him. Hugo dismissed him with irritation. As he looked over the weak performance of the recruits, Hugo thought of Isaac von Reinhardt, the only participant who had reached stage 20. At least Isaac showed potential. The rest disappointed him deeply. He muttered to himself that the quality of trainees had never been this low. Then he heard steady footsteps approaching. Subaru walked forward. Hugo glanced at him and muttered about how heavy the name Subaru Hase felt, considering how unimpressive the young man looked. He questioned Subaru's chances of passing. Subaru simply nodded calmly. As soon as the system generated 2 goblins, Hugo began to announce the start of the test. But before he could finish, a tremendous gust swept past him. He snapped his head to the side in confusion. Something had moved faster than he could see. Subaru stood in the center of the arena, smiling with confidence as blood dripped around him. He knew that spending 2 days testing this body had been worth it. The body he now lived in possessed incredible hidden abilities. When the system asked if he wanted to proceed, Subaru agreed without hesitation. He wanted to finish quickly. Hugo stared in disbelief as more goblins died instantly, their heads flying through the air. The arena was quickly filling with monster corpses. Hugo analyzed Subaru's movements carefully and realized he wasn't just swinging wildly, he was predicting the goblins' attacks several steps ahead. This wasn't normal sword skill. Even Hugo himself couldn't perform moves so precisely. He stared at Subaru's confident expression and whispered that such talent seemed impossible, unless this boy was the reincarnation of Subaru Narukami himself. Subaru continued slicing through goblins with terrifying speed, blood splashing in every direction. A system message appeared announcing that he had cleared stage 49 and asking if he wanted to face the final boss. Subaru wiped sweat from his forehead, his eyes glowing with excitement, and accepted. The ground cracked apart as a giant hand burst out, smashing the arena floor. Stones flew everywhere as the towering boss emerged. Hyuga screamed in panic, rushing forward to stop Subaru. He called him a fool and reminded him that he was not the real Subaru Narukami. If he continued, he would die. Subaru remained standing firmly at the center of the arena, surrounded by the fallen bodies of goblins, while the enormous Goblin King loomed before him with an aura filled with rage, as if the monster could sense every sacrifice made in the previous 49 stages. From the edge of the arena, Hyuga continued shouting desperately for Subaru to surrender before it was too late, insisting that facing the Goblin King at such a low level was nothing but reckless suicide. He kept reminding himself that no amount of talent or technique could bridge the vast difference in physical ability between a beginner and a creature of this scale. Subaru understood this reality very well. He knew that his current stats were far too low to pierce the monster's thick, hardened skin. Yet despite recognizing this, he refused to take a single step back. Instead, he let his sword slip from his hand and fall to the ground, a move that pushed Hyuga into near hysteria as he wondered if the young man had completely lost his mind by discarding his only weapon. The Goblin King immediately lunged forward with a crushing attack meant to flatten him, but the creature suddenly halted when it realized a thin needle had pierced its leg. Subaru knelt nearby with a calm expression, holding several sharp needles between his fingers, and asked the massive creature if it was surprised, his smile carrying a hint of mockery. He then muttered that they could make a simple bet on who would collapse first, warning the Goblin King that he would fill its entire body with more needles before it ever managed to reach him. With a faint glow of blue energy in his eyes, Subaru prepared to unleash the attack he had planned from the moment he stepped into the arena. The needles shot from his hand with the speed of lightning, striking the monster's eyes and face with precise accuracy, forcing a violent scream of pain from the Goblin King's throat. Blinded and enraged, the monster swung its massive axe wildly, smashing the ground in random patterns, while Subaru moved around it lightly and gracefully, avoiding each blow as if he were simply gliding through the air. When he landed, he took a brief moment to study his opponent and recalled old lessons about rotational force and throwing power. Lessons from Miss Reina, who had once scolded him endlessly for his poor technique, and explained that even a simple fountain pen could become a lethal weapon when thrown from its exact center of gravity. Applying those teachings perfectly, Subaru targeted the monster's weak points with unmatched precision, each needle landing where it mattered most. The Goblin King staggered violently, blood pouring from its neck and body, its form riddled with needles like a collapsing statue. Subaru stood confidently and told himself that strength came from rotational force and that accuracy had no place for hesitation. He quietly admitted that these techniques were what Ria had taught him long ago, and even he would never have mastered them to this degree without her guidance. Hyuga, watching everything unfold, felt his entire view of the exam collapsing. Only now did he understand that the reason the goblin corpses and leftover weapons had not disappeared was that the stage had not officially ended, something he had always taken for granted. Subaru, however, had noticed this from the start and used the poison needles dropped in earlier battles as hidden weapons. Sweat streamed down Hyuga's face as he realized Subaru was not relying only on fencing, but on a mix of prediction, technique, and resourcefulness far beyond what he had ever seen. He muttered to himself that calling Subaru a genius did not even begin to describe what he was witnessing. At last, as the Goblin King exhaled its final breath, its enormous body crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact that declared the battle over. Subaru walked forward calmly, retrieved his sword, and stood before the monster's lifeless form, telling it that he held no resentment before finishing it off. System messages appeared one after another, announcing the defeat of the boss and clearing of the 50th stage of the tutorial program for the first time in recorded history. Subaru wiped sweat from his forehead and muttered in disbelief about how cruel it was to place a monster of this level in what was supposed to be a beginner tutorial. More notifications followed, showing his level rising, his credits increasing, and a large number of achievement points being added. Then came the message he was most interested in. The tutorial shop had opened. When he checked his points and saw the number 2425, he froze for a moment, stunned by a total larger than anything he had ever seen in his previous life. Browsing through the store, he noticed that most normal tools cost between 5 and 200 points, meaning he had far more than enough to choose from. His eyes first settled on an unfamiliar demon sword priced at 1,000 points, a rare weapon forged by a failed magic blacksmith that boosted cutting power at the cost of consuming the user's health and soul. The idea was tempting, but Subaru reminded himself that his lightning skill already drained his life force, meaning combining the two would be extremely dangerous. He then examined the holy sword Miranda, worth 1,400 points, a weapon designed to reduce fatigue and lengthen combat duration. He considered it safer but not entirely ideal, and he found himself torn between the destructive potential of the demon sword and the dependable stability of the holy sword. As he continued scrolling, he discovered something unexpected further down the list, an F-rank skill called Wedge of Greed, priced at 1,400 points, with an effect that suppressed the side effects of any tool or skill used by the player. Subaru felt sweat forming on his forehead in amazement. He had never encountered a skill like this before. Its potential was enormous. It could cancel the demonic sword's curse and possibly reduce the toll of his own lightning ability. Realizing how valuable it was, he made his decision swiftly, choosing both Wedge of Greed and the unknown demon sword. After spending most of his points, he summoned the demon sword and tested it, finding the synergy between the weapon and the new skill exactly as he hoped. He preferred this flexible combination over depending on a single skill. Huger interrupted him with a mix of praise and confusion, stating that while Subaru's item compatibility seemed impressive, he himself could not understand why Subaru would buy such a strange, seemingly useless skill. Subaru sighed with obvious boredom and asked if Huger truly expected him to explain every tiny detail. Annoyed by the tone, Huger scolded him until Subaru quickly pretended to tremble apologetically, claiming he struggled with formal speech. Huger forced himself to calm down, assuming the boy's rudeness came from fatigue. Subaru glanced at the old supervisor and suddenly remembered the past, realizing that the sniffling young fan who once asked him for an autograph had somehow grown into this strict exam proctor. Back then, the young Huger had approached eagerly and asked if Subaru could write his name. Subaru had done so, unaware that the child would one day lecture him endlessly about morals and complain about how the current generation lacked discipline. Subaru, meanwhile, simply thought that times had changed, just like the amount of hair remaining on Huger's head. The more Huger lectured, the more Subaru ignored him. When asked again why he chose the skill, Subaru avoided the question entirely by claiming that exam confidentiality prevented him from answering. Huger shouted after him angrily, threatening to teach him manners personally. Attempting to regain composure, Huger then tried to recruit Subaru into the Chivalry Guild, only to be stunned when Subaru rejected the offer instantly and without hesitation. A system prompt appeared before Subaru asking whether he wished to move to the second floor. Huger tried to chase after him, shouting for him to stop, but Subaru paid him no attention at all and vanished from sight as soon as he accepted the prompt. Standing alone, Huger muttered his deep disappointment in the young man's behavior. Subaru soon arrived on the second floor, where his feet touched the familiar land of the City of Beginnings. The area was bustling with life, with vendors calling out to sell strange goods ranging from deep-sea rags from Runeterra to dried meats and Murim silk robes. Walking through the lively streets, Subaru felt the certainty of his return growing stronger. He acknowledged that he had been given a rare opportunity, a second chance no one normally received. With memories of his old comrades gathered around their campfires, he made a quiet promise to himself to take revenge for them, and for the horrific fate they had once met together. Subaru walked toward the training building with the intention of testing his new equipment, and he asked the old clerk at the reception for a private room. The man looked at him with dull eyes and lazily asked which floor he had come from. Subaru replied briefly that he had just climbed up, which made the man assume he was another beginner visiting the building for the first time. The employee pointed toward the corridor and suggested room 1, saying it would suit his level since it contained only a straw dummy. Subaru, however, asked for room 5, and the man stared at him as though he had misheard. He warned Subaru sincerely that choosing such a high-level room would be nothing but a waste of money, and advised him to stay in the first room instead. Subaru thanked him for the concern, but insisted on booking room 5 for 30 minutes. He paid 50 credits and headed down the hall, and the employee shouted after him that he wouldn't return any money if Subaru gave up halfway, calling him a wannabe hero under his breath. The training rooms increased in difficulty as the number rose. The first contained dummies, the second held denser materials, and the third housed heavy rocks. Naturally, other visitors looked at Subaru with disdain as he passed them on his way to the higher rooms. Subaru closed the iron door behind him and stood in the dim light, preparing to begin. He drew the unknown demon sword, which glowed faintly red the moment its system recognized him. A burst of massive crimson energy exploded outward, greedily draining his health and mana to boost his physical strength in a violent spike. The Wedge of Greed's skill activated instantly, trying to resist the backlash and restore some of the lost health. But at level 1, it could not completely block the sword's recoil, and Subaru felt his fatigue rise. He understood immediately that the skill's current level was too weak to endure the weapon's appetite. The sword continued pulling life from his body with hunger, yet with every drop taken from him, his strength doubled in response. Subaru clenched his jaw, realizing he had reached the limit of what he could tolerate for now. But since this result matched his expectations, he did not hesitate to spend 10,000 credits to upgrade the Wedge of Greed. The skill rose to level 2, and the next upgrade demanded 20,000 credits. Even so, the improvement was noticeable. The upgraded skill resisted the backlash more effectively, though the sword still fed on his health. The raw power pulsing through him grew infinitely stronger, and Subaru declared the experiment a success as he leapt into the air with his glowing sword raised, ready to test its destructive force. Outside, the old employee struggled against sleep in the quiet office. Suddenly, the door to room 5 opened, and Subaru stepped out, making the man jump in fear as if he were hallucinating. He looked at the clock and muttered in disbelief that the boy had been inside for barely 10 minutes. He hurried to the room, calling out to check if Subaru was still there, and opened the door slowly. The sight froze him. The entire room was in ruins. The walls were cracked, the floor gouged open, and even the massive training rock had been sliced perfectly in half. He stood trembling, unable to understand what had happened inside. Elsewhere, Subaru woke up in his hotel room, stretching and wondering how long he had slept since his body still felt slightly stiff. Later, he sat in the hotel lobby sipping coffee while thinking back on his experiment with the cursed sword. He realized that if the weapon had not been magical, its consequences would have been far worse, but the burden had dropped significantly thanks to the synergy with Wedge of Greed. He reviewed his status, seeing his modest level 10 and low physical statistics, and admitted that normally he would not even have been able to lift such a sword. Remembering the training, he noted with satisfaction how perfectly the sword and the skill worked together, and he imagined how powerful the combination would be once he mixed lightning into it. His confidence faded when he checked his remaining balance and found barely 50 credits left, far short of the 20,000 he needed to upgrade the skill again. He sighed miserably, wondering whether this body had been poor for its entire life. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud greeting echoing through the lobby. Subaru turned to see a young man wearing cat ears, broadcasting a live stream with excessive enthusiasm as he talked about his adventures on the second floor and his early days in the tower. Moments later, a donation of 1,000 credits flashed across the screen, sending the streamer into dramatic celebration. In his excitement, he spilled hot coffee on himself, but pretended to handle the accident kindly to impress his viewers. Subaru stared at him in disbelief, wondering if people had truly gone mad. Out of curiosity, he searched for information about the live streaming era and learned that 1 out of every 3 players relied on streaming to earn points. Realizing the man was essentially panhandling through performance, Subaru wondered if this was how players survived now. Before he could continue reading, a familiar voice called his name. Subaru turned to see an elegantly dressed young man approaching him, asking whether he had climbed up as well, commenting on the strange coincidence and questioning where he was staying. Subaru felt a strange sensation in his body, not annoyance, but an instinctive reaction, something that suggested the original owner of this body had a troubled relationship with this person. The man spoke with a cold arrogance, warning Subaru not to ignore him as if he were speaking to thin air. Subaru studied him and realized that the discomfort rising in him was not only irritation but something deeper, triggered fully when the man introduced himself as Isaac. Subaru answered stiffly that he had just climbed up, and Isaac laughed sarcastically, saying he never expected a weakling like him to survive the tutorial since he assumed Subaru would die to the first goblin that looked at him. Memories of the original Subaru Haas flooded into Subaru's mind. He saw the old scene clearly, the young Subaru trembling before Isaac, who demanded to know why he acted so timid, scolding him harshly and accusing him of trying to calm him down with a blank face. The memory continued as Isaac insulted him, declaring that even his name annoyed him and accusing him of failing at the simplest tasks while trying to earn sympathy as an orphan. Subaru saw himself crying in the memory, trying desperately to explain that the credit given to him had not been enough, yet Isaac refused to listen. Isaac struck him violently, knocking him to the ground, and ordered him to stay silent, calling him trash. He mocked him further, saying the box Subaru hid in would become his home from now on, and he threatened him with darker consequences if he left it. Subaru now understood clearly why the previous owner of this body had been hiding in a garbage container. Back in the present, Isaac bragged boastfully about clearing 20 stages and breaking his father's record, saying even Supervisor Huger admired him. He bragged about earning a B-rank skill in the tutorial and then demanded a drink. Subaru responded coldly that he was leaving, ignoring Isaac's attempts to boast further. Isaac stopped him in a commanding tone and ordered him to buy a cheap coffee on his way back. Subaru sighed out of boredom, which instantly caught Isaac's attention. Isaac noticed the change in Subaru's behavior and asked sharply what had happened to him, wondering whether his soul had been replaced. Subaru told him with a cool expression that he had no credit to buy anything and advised him to get his own coffee. When Subaru turned to leave, Isaac ordered him to sit down in a threatening, low voice. Subaru refused, thinking silently that he had no time to avenge the old body's suffering now. But he warned Isaac not to obstruct him. Isaac grabbed Subaru's arm tightly and reminded him darkly of the consequences that awaited runaway trash. Subaru looked at him with a sharp expression and advised him to let go for his own good. Subaru understood that picking a fight in such a crowded place would only put him at a disadvantage, so he held himself back. Isaac suddenly burst into exaggerated laughter, claiming that he had only been joking to scare him like he used to in the past, and released Subaru's arm while calling him a cowardly small fry who still hadn't changed. He kept mocking him, saying he could easily guess that Subaru must have passed the tutorial with great difficulty. Subaru watched him silently, aware that the body's reaction wasn't emotional but instinctual. Isaac stepped closer and asked with disdain if Subaru truly intended to fight him, reminding him boldly of his father's power and mentioning that he could make Subaru disappear without anyone knowing. He left with a condescending laugh, calling him friend as if it were a joke. Subaru remained still, anger boiling quietly as he repeated the word friend to himself with deep sarcasm. The scene shifted to explain the tower's growth system, revealing that there were two primary paths. The first was through tower trials inside virtual space, where players gained experience and rewards with relative safety, since losing only meant forfeiting progress and credits without risking their lives. The second path was real-world hunting, where players fought monsters outside safe zones or inside physical dungeons. Growth through hunting was much faster, but the danger was absolute, since death there meant true, permanent death with monsters devouring players without mercy. This was why most people avoided real hunting despite its overwhelming benefits. In the dim entrance of the orc nest, the dark walls seemed to breathe with the cries of unseen creatures. Subaru sat exhausted beside the corpse of a massive beast he had just killed, admitting to himself with a tired smile that safety always came with slowness, while danger offered speed. He pulled out his tablet to check the news and was surprised to find a live stream of someone impersonating him. The streamer wore a mask identical to Subaru's old one and greeted an audience of more than 80,000 people while announcing his challenge of the third floor. Subaru felt disgusted by how many imitators exploited his name and image. Suddenly, a mission appeared on the stream labeled "Narukami Subaru is a fool," offering 20,000 credits. The imposter accepted it with undeserved gratitude and overwhelming excitement. More absurd yet profitable missions followed, such as the Lonely Wallet and Idol of Baldness, all with shocking rewards. Subaru stared at the screen in disbelief. He compared the effortless income the pretender was earning with his own situation, where he had to risk his life against monsters for credits, and he looked again at the miserable balance of 50 credits he had left. He sighed and put the tablet away, accepting that he had no choice but to continue fighting. He wiped the blood off his sword and prepared for another round. As he faced a fresh wave of angry orcs, the area boss, the orc general, appeared with a suffocating aura. Subaru stood confidently before the monster and its guards, remarking that they had no poisonous needles today, but that he had something even better. Activating the Wedge of Greed, he allowed the sword to drain his health and amplify his power, smiling in a wild yet controlled way as he declared he didn't have time to waste. He leapt high and crushed one of the orc's skulls under his foot, recovering some health and mental stamina. Then he launched forward with overwhelming speed, cutting through the enemies before jumping above the general and striking with a single decisive blow that eliminated the boss. A notification appeared confirming the dungeon's completion, and he stood in the ruined nest, victorious. Later, Subaru took out his old mask and looked at it with a serious expression, realizing that he would have to wear it again. Standing before the mirror, he put it on and understood clearly how streamers earned their money. If he was going to try this, he would do it properly and with his full strength. He prepared a stream titled Narukami Subaru, which immediately created a disturbance at the Sutin Entertainment Company headquarters. Inside the building, a female employee was watching the stream with visible irritation, only to suddenly scream in shock. Her colleague rushed to her, asking what had happened, and she pointed at the screen with disbelief. She cursed and ranted, unable to accept that someone had cleared a near-impossible mission that only 5 players had ever completed. Her colleague tried to calm her down, reminding her that foul language triggered fines under the self-censorship rules, then asked who this person was. She answered that the name displayed was Sububiki, which her colleague assumed must be another imposter or some new mix of imitators. She explained that with the original Subaru absent for so long, the strongest imitation naturally became the closest thing to authenticity. Elsewhere in the company, Hatsuka sat in her office complaining wearily about the countless copycats pretending to be Subaru Narukami. Her colleague wondered aloud if the streaming world had lost its value. Hatsuka immediately corrected him, saying this industry was their livelihood, even though most players found the effort required to climb the tower boring compared to watching streams. When asked why she herself had quit climbing the tower and settled for this job, she answered simply that she had grown bored of it. Her colleague teased her, and Hatsuka scolded him emotionally, pointing out that he too had quit climbing, and if she had time, she would search for actual talent instead of dealing with nonsense like this. He admitted calmly that he simply lacked the skill to continue. Hatsuka continued complaining, mentioning that he only entered the tower hopping to meet Subaru Narukami and lost all motivation when his idol disappeared. Then she suddenly gasped and pointed at the screen again. Her colleague hurried over, asking if she had found another strange streamer. She showed him a new broadcast from someone wearing Subaru's outfit. He called it terrible and ridiculous, asking why she was watching a meaningless second-floor stream with 0 viewers, saying it insulted her job as a talent scout. But Hatsuka stared intensely, whispering that whenever she saw someone wearing that mask, she couldn't stop herself from feeling a strange kind of hope. Without hesitation, she donated 1,000 credits, leaving her colleague kneeling in disbelief. Meanwhile, Subaru walked through the starter dungeon on the 2nd floor, commenting that although the place was not difficult, it carried a tense atmosphere. He sensed a strange pressure as if someone were watching him closely despite being alone. He checked the few viewer comments. One person asked which floor he was on, and he answered that this was his first challenge. Another viewer named Love Money warned him that streaming was dangerous for beginners who did not know the dungeon paths well. Subaru continued walking cautiously until a one-eyed bat descended on him abruptly. He reacted quickly, countering the attack and defeating it with a single strike. A notification of its defeat appeared, adding 1 achievement point. Subaru turned back to the camera and asked the viewers coolly if there was any problem. Subaru continued walking through the dim dungeon corridor while the comments on his stream slowly increased. One viewer named White admired his quick reactions, while Love Money advised him not to get greedy and suggested he wait for a team. Subaru read the comments with indifference and thanked Love Money politely, though he added that such an option simply wasn't possible for him. He said confidently that he preferred challenging the dungeon alone, a statement that immediately provoked waves of mockery from viewers who predicted his inevitable death. Subaru ignored their sarcasm and focused instead on the monster emerging from the murky ground ahead of him. A mud nymph burst upward with a shriek, but Subaru dodged the attack smoothly and dispatched it with a single blow from his demonic sword. He told himself that it was time to test the limits of his abilities and see how far he could push this body. A notification appeared showing that he had gained 2 achievement points, and viewers expressed confusion about how quickly the monster had fallen. The dungeon suddenly echoed with screeching, and a swarm of bats along with several mud nymphs surged toward him. Subaru moved like a storm, slashing through enemies from both sides while the red glow of the demonic sword traced arcs of light in the darkness. Viewers fell silent with astonishment, trying to understand how someone on the second floor could move with such destructive speed. Successive messages appeared on Subaru's interface announcing more defeated monsters and accumulated points. Subaru stood steady among the corpses, gripping his sword, and it became clear to everyone watching that he wasn't another cheap imitator but someone worth paying attention to. In the pitch-black cave, Subaru began explaining how one could identify the number and distance of enemies by listening carefully to small, subtle sounds. His explanation was met with ridicule, and the viewers called him a liar pretending to be experienced when he was only a beginner. Subaru placed a hand on his mask, thinking that if the viewers understood who he truly was, they would not doubt the meaning behind his words. But they continued arguing that he was impersonating Narukami Subaru for fame, while he walked on with steady determination, reminding himself that the points he had collected were far too few and that he needed far more before leaving this dungeon. The viewers continued their sarcastic commentary, with one saying that a real man simply rushes forward, and others asking whether Subaru had done any research before entering such a dangerous area. Subaru suddenly stopped walking and lifted his gaze upward. The viewers froze in shock when the camera revealed the ceiling, completely covered with hundreds of one-eyed bats. Their red eyes lit up in unison, filling the chat with panic as viewers anticipated Subaru's guaranteed death. A new mission appeared from a viewer named My Only Stream, offering only 100 credits if Subaru defeated all the bats. Most of the audience called it a malicious trap and a cruel joke, but Subaru accepted the mission calmly and thanked the viewer for the reward. The scene shifted to the broadcasting company where Hatsuka's colleague slammed his desk in frustration after another failed attempt at reaching the 6th floor. He apologized hurriedly to Hatsuka for disturbing her, but she didn't respond immediately. Her focus was entirely locked onto her device. When her colleague asked what she was looking at and why she had become so quiet, she said something felt incorrect. The man misunderstood and began rambling excuses, insisting that the amount of money wasn't large and that he could pay it back, thinking she was upset about his gambling. Hatsuka shook her head in disbelief, saying she wasn't talking about that at all. Then she pointed at the screen and uttered the name Narukami Subaru. Her colleague was confused that she was still watching that small stream, but when he looked at the screen, his face drained of color as he whispered that what he was seeing was impossible. On the screen, Subaru was tearing through the swarm of bats like a hurricane, his sword leaving sharp red trails as monsters fell in heaps. The viewers began screaming in the comments, unable to believe that such combat was happening in a beginner dungeon on the 2nd floor, and some even wrote messages expressing pity for the bats. No one could understand how many creatures he was defeating with each strike. During the intense combat, Subaru remembered Shigeru's words from long ago, when she told him he was amazing because even when he changed the direction of his sword mid-cut, neither his breathing nor his gaze wavered. She explained that although it looked like he cut enemies in a single blow, in reality he predicted their fluid movements and planned his counters in advance. Subaru recalled replying that he didn't think about anything special while fighting, which had irritated Shigeru back then. She complained that it would be easier if he couldn't do these things so naturally, and called him annoying. The memory faded as Subaru returned to the present and sliced through the remaining bats with disciplined focus, applying his core principle of engaging enemies directly. Maintain eye contact, convey intent clearly, and never target enemies one by one when dealing with a group. He told the viewers that one-eyed bats always attacked by thrusting their heads forward, and the more there were, the bigger the opening they created for him to exploit. With that understanding, he rushed into their formation and cut through them efficiently. When the fight finally ended, Subaru stood amid the scattered remains with blood dripping from his sword. The viewers complained that his explanation made no sense and demanded he apologize for confusing them, but Subaru remained calm. One person even compared his advice to telling someone that if they put one foot forward, they could walk. Subaru could only think to himself how difficult communication truly was. Love Money reminded him not to forget to accept the challenge reward, and Subaru suddenly realized he had forgotten about it entirely. He began tapping the screen hesitantly, causing viewers to wonder whether the stream had frozen. Subaru stared at the interface helplessly, trying to figure out how to claim the reward, and the chat erupted in laughter over his lack of technical understanding. Eventually, with Love Money's guidance, he pressed the correct button and received the 100 credits. He thanked the viewer sincerely and announced that the next challenge would be the last. As he continued forward with confidence, his balance reached 150 credits and his achievement points rose to 118. At the broadcasting office, Hatsuka suddenly screamed so loudly that her colleague jumped in fear and asked why she was shouting. Hatsuka pointed at her screen with disbelief, asking if he had ever seen anything like this before. Her colleague tried to calm her down, reminding her that it was only a second-floor stream, but she grew more emotional, insisting she was reacting this way for a real reason. He apologized nervously, not wanting to provoke her further. Hatsuko excitedly began imagining that this person might actually be Subaru Narukami returning from Earth, wondering if fate was involved, and suggesting reincarnation theories she had read in novels. Her colleague watched her with concern, thinking that she lost her mind whenever something involved Subaru. Hatsuka felt dizzy from excitement and asked Seong Hyun to pinch her to check if she was dreaming, but he refused. He asked if she seriously planned to recruit this person, and Hatsuka answered with bright enthusiasm that even if he wasn't the real Subaru, his skill as a solo streamer was extraordinary, and she intended to pursue him. Seong Hyun tried to talk her out of it, warning that their superior would be furious if he found out. Hatsuka reminded him that he was gambling earlier and therefore had no right to act serious now. She ignored him completely and opened Subaru's stream with intent, declaring that he should wait and watch because she knew she was right. Meanwhile, Subaru reached the end of the dungeon where a large gate appeared. Passing through it, he found himself facing a massive wolf-like figure sitting with imposing calm. The wolf warrior Greg watched him with majestic pressure that even the viewers could feel through the screen, and one viewer commented that he had failed 8 times against Greg already. A new mission appeared instructing Subaru to gain the wolf warrior's recognition in order to proceed. Subaru explained that Greg wasn't a monster to be hunted, but rather a guardian meant to test a player's worthiness. Unexpectedly, another mission appeared from a user called Safe Origin, offering 3,000 credits if Subaru defeated Greg. Subaru was shocked by the amount, and viewers immediately reacted with disbelief, calling the donor cruel for requesting the impossible and assuming Subaru would never even consider fighting Greg. The wolf warrior Greg, guardian of the second floor, stood tall before Subaru as the system displayed a message requiring Subaru to earn the warrior's recognition. The wolf observed him with sharp, piercing eyes and asked in a deep voice whether he had come alone. Subaru agreed calmly, and the wolf stepped closer with suspicion until Subaru added that anyone could see it just by looking. Greg sniffed him and commented that Subaru carried the scent of a great warrior, something that confused the viewers who immediately mocked the wolf's contradiction, since Subaru looked nothing like what they expected. Subaru explained to himself that wolves from Greg's tribe had a special sense that allowed them to perceive a person's essence rather than their body scent, and the Guardian soon confirmed Subaru possessed the qualities needed to pass. Greg ended the test and allowed him through, surprising viewers who had expected a completely different outcome. But Subaru did not move toward the gate. Instead, he muttered that nothing like this had happened in his previous life, and that he found it a pity because his true target had been the wolf himself. Greg paused and asked if Subaru meant he intended to fight him instead of the gate behind him. Subaru confirmed without hesitation, his eyes glowing faintly behind the mask as he explained that someone had requested he kill the Guardian. Greg bared his fangs in amusement, saying Subaru truly had the spirit of a warrior, just as he expected. At the Suit and Entertainment headquarters, the department manager John Teal typed loudly on his keyboard as he reviewed reports. He asked sharply about the stream's viewer count, so Seong Hyun answered nervously that it was around 20, but Hatsuka corrected him immediately in a flat tone, saying it had already surpassed 30 and silently calling him a fool. The manager glared suspiciously at both of them, accusing them of wasting time with streams and gambling instead of searching for talent as assigned. Hatsuka barely heard him and continued watching the screen, muttering that the count had reached 30, which only fueled the manager's irritation. He asked sarcastically if she wanted to become a streamer herself. Before he could finish, Hatsuka cried out that the number had passed 40, cutting off his scolding entirely while he shouted behind her for attention. Back in the dungeon, Subaru faced the wolf warrior as the beast growled and prepared to tear into him. Subaru tightened his grip on the demonic sword, forcing himself to focus solely on the battle, while the weapon began draining his health, and magic to increase his strength. His body's power rose proportionally to the energy consumed, and he tried to steady his breathing as the wedge of greed skill worked to soften the sword's recoil. He told himself to fight the way he always had, even if it was his first time in this new body. Greg lunged with claws that tore through stone and air alike, and the clash of steel and bone sent sparks flying as Subaru blocked. The beast launched fast, consecutive strikes from all angles that Subaru only barely managed to parry or evade. He recognized quickly that matching the wolf physically was impossible, so he needed another method. Greg continued his assault, praising Subaru's durability while declaring confidently that Subaru had no chance of victory. Viewers filled the comments predicting Subaru's defeat, saying his approach was too defensive and that Greg's strength was overwhelming. Some advised he come back later after more attempts and blamed the mission requester for setting an impossible task. Subaru backed away to catch his breath, thinking rapidly that victory did not always rely on power alone. Greg, seemingly satisfied, announced that the duel had run its course and that he would end it swiftly. He slammed the ground with tremendous force, shattering stone and raising a cloud of dust. But Subaru suddenly emerged from the cloud and struck back, telling the beast that those had been his own lines, and pointing out that Greg's attacks were predictable and one-sided. Greg was stunned as Subaru dodged the next bite and claw swipe with sharp agility, saying that avoiding such movements was easy. Subaru seized the opening and cut directly into Greg's side, drawing a cry of pain from the warrior. He followed it with a crushing vertical strike that split into the wolf's chest with a spray of blood. Subaru stood over him, steady and cold, while Greg acknowledged his strength and called him a great warrior before taking his final breath. Subaru remained among the blood-covered stones as the system projected messages announcing his victory over the wolf warrior. His level rose by 2, his strength and agility increased, and notifications followed for boosted focus and magic. He received 500 achievement points at once. The stream exploded with disbelief and amazement that someone alone had defeated such a monster. Subaru struggled to catch his breath and whispered a quiet acknowledgement of his win. The viewer count climbed to 56, while people praised the bold viewer who had dared to issue the impossible mission. A notification then appeared showing the completion of the challenge and the transfer of 3,000 credits from Safe Origin. Subaru checked the screen and promised himself he would use the unexpected amount well. His balance rose beyond 3,000, and his achievement points reached 600 as the massive gate opened slowly with a deep, echoing sound. He sensed a strange vibration in the atmosphere that even the viewers noticed. A large interface materialized before him, displaying a full array of elemental trial paths: ice, fire, earth, illusion, poison, metal, soul, and water. The viewers were stunned, remarking that even the highest recorded number was 16, and that the amount reflected a player's talent directly. Subaru ignored all of them and focused on the lightning test, and the system asked if he wished to choose it. Encouraged loudly by viewers, he answered confidently that of course he did. The system confirmed the selection, and Subaru stepped toward the bright light filling the gate. Meanwhile, at the office, Hatsuka jumped from her seat shouting with joy at Subaru's victory. She showed her phone to her colleagues proudly, pointing at the stream count that had already reached 60 and expressing her amazement at seeing 13 test options appear for him. John Teal watched her nervously, wiping sweat from his forehead, admitting quietly that defeating the wolf warrior, who had never been defeated before, was undeniably impressive. But he tried to reassure himself by saying Subaru was still only a beginner on the second floor, and that investing in him now would be unreasonable. Hatsuka refused to accept the hesitation. She made a bold proposal, shocking her coworkers. She declared that she and Seong Hyun would work for fixed salaries for 5 years if Subaru failed to obtain the lightning element, but if he succeeded, the manager would have to sign a contract with him on the spot. Seong Hyun panicked and shouted that he didn't agree to any of this and barely knew the streamer, pushing Hatsuka aside. The manager smirked, mocking the low probability of success, reminding them that the only person in history to ever obtain lightning was Subaru Narukami himself. Hatsuka answered with a sly and unwavering smile, saying they wouldn't know until the attempt was made. The manager accepted the bet coldly while Hatsuka forcibly covered her colleague's mouth to prevent him from interfering. Back in the test arena, the system announced the beginning of the lightning trial when Subaru suddenly sensed a dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Someone shouted a sharp warning and rushed in, pushing him aside just as a violent explosion erupted, scattering rocks and debris across the room. When the dust settled, A massive white creature stood flexing its huge muscles, and the stranger who had saved him scolded Subaru angrily for losing focus, asking if he had a death wish. A system message appeared immediately, ordering the defeat of the fragment of the giant. Subaru knelt on the ground in disbelief, wondering how such a monster had appeared here. The giant growled loudly, confusing the viewers who couldn't understand why a creature from the Circle of Giants race was appearing in a lightning challenge. Subaru stared at the enormous figure, realizing with unease that this was a boss-class monster that should have appeared only in the second half of the trial, not at the very beginning. As the giant raised its enormous club to attack, Subaru wondered silently whether killing the wolf warrior Greg had altered the test structure and increased its difficulty. The giant slammed its weapon down, shaking the arena and sending stone fragments flying in all directions. Subaru dodged the strike with ease and noted that despite its massive size, its physical capability was far inferior to Greg's. He thanked his luck for knowing this beforehand. The person who had saved him yelled again, accusing him of wasting their effort and ordering him to run while he still could. Subaru, however, decided that the battle had to end before anyone interfered. Drawing his sword, he activated the unknown demon's sword ability, allowing the blade to drain his health and magnify his combat power. To reduce the backlash, he triggered the level 2 Wedge of Greed skill, pushing his body just enough to withstand the weapon's hunger. As the giant charged at him with another crushing stomp, Subaru dodged lightly and watched the ground crumble under its force. Rather than retreat, Subaru sprinted forward and ran up the giant's extended arm with lightning speed. The creature blinked in confusion, unable to follow his movement, and before it understood, Subaru was already behind it in midair. He landed firmly on its shoulder and plunged the sword deep into its flesh, drawing a spray of thick blood. The monster roared in pain, but Subaru simply stared coldly and muttered in annoyance at the noise. With a direct and decisive swing, he silenced the creature permanently, telling it to remain quiet for the rest of its life. Blood erupted from its neck as the giant collapsed with a thunderous crash. A system message appeared, announcing the defeat of the fragment of the giant and clearing of the fourth stage. The viewers watching the stream erupted in shock, unable to understand how Subaru had suddenly leapt all the way to stage 4. More notifications followed, showing his level rising and his strength, agility, health, and magic increasing. He also gained 4,000 achievement points at once along with 2 rare items, the Heart of the Giant and the Lightning Bolt armor. The comments exploded in amazement at the reward generosity and the unprecedented feat of clearing stages 1 through 4 by defeating Greg. The person who had saved him ran back, panting heavily, and the viewers identified him as Falcon. Falcon stared at Subaru in disbelief and asked what exactly he was. Subaru sheathed his sword calmly and answered that Falcon could tell just by looking. He then stood tall in a heroic stance and declared that he was the one who came to defeat the giant, though viewers mocked his vague and theatrical answer. The scene shifted to a small, quiet village where Subaru entered an inn and sat on the bed to rest. The viewers demanded to see the items he had obtained, expecting something powerful. Subaru agreed cheerfully, saying he was curious himself, and opened his inventory. The first item was the Heart of the Giant, a rare ring that increased health by 2 points and enhanced recovery, a bonus he admired. The second was Lightning Bolt, a rare armor that boosted defense by 5, carried lightning energy, and even had an active skill capable of negating negative status effects once a day. Subaru wore the armor and appeared far more imposing with its sleek lightning design. Suddenly, a new mission popped up from a viewer named Narukami Koa, offering 5,000 credits for learning the lightning skill. Similar missions followed from viewers like I Am Bald, Mission Villain, and Safe Origin, all offering enormous sums of credits just to watch him use lightning. Subaru thanked them sincerely, promising that he would definitely show them lightning's power. Yet as he looked at the long list of expensive requests, he wondered why so many people were specifically waiting for him to use the lightning skill, and a vague sense of suspicion began forming quietly in his mind. Subaru began to understand that the original Subaru Narukami had been far more influential than he had imagined. Before he could think deeper about it, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts, and he allowed the visitor to enter. The viewers immediately noticed from the comments that someone seemed to be eavesdropping. The door opened, revealing Falcon accompanied by a handsome knight clad in polished armor. Falcon introduced the knight with respect, apologizing for the delay and explaining that this was Lord Pellis, commander of the village knights. Falcon spoke about the frequent giant raids in recent days, explaining that the knights had been on constant alert with full armament to protect the villagers. They asked the residents not to leave their homes unless absolutely necessary. Pellis discussed security measures with his assistant, and Falcon mentioned how strange it was to meet a new traveler during a crisis like this. Pellis then turned to Subaru and thanked him on behalf of the village, saying he had heard about Subaru's help while the knights had been away. Subaru replied modestly, saying he had only done what anyone would have done. As Subaru looked closely at Pellis, he recognized him as the knight who stood like a wall protecting this village. Pellis explained that during their reconnaissance they had finally located the giant leader's den, and he stated with firm resolve that they were prepared to risk their lives to corner him. He then bowed his head before Subaru and asked for his help, swallowing his pride as commander for the sake of the villagers. Subaru watched silently as live-stream comments filled with urgent warnings, with viewers calling Pellis by name, some asking others to stop spoiling what would happen next. Subaru remembered the original story clearly and realized the painful truth that Pellis was destined to die in the next stage. Knowing this inevitable fate, Subaru asked Pellis to lift his head, looking at him with a mixture of pity and determination. He agreed to help, and Pellis's face reflected relief and renewed confidence. At that moment, a system notification appeared announcing the beginning of the fifth stage, survival. The small army marched toward the rugged mountains while Subaru walked among them, occasionally checking his tablet. With the growing number of viewers, the comments were flowing too quickly to track, and he realized how difficult communicating with the audience had become under these conditions. Suddenly Pellis raised a hand, ordering everyone to stop. He pointed into the distance and whispered that the enemy was there. The giant leader slept against a hill, his tattooed body and thick beard making him appear even more fearsome. Pellis quickly formed a strategy, suggesting he would draw the leader's attention while Subaru struck from behind, using the advantage of surprise. Subaru, however, stopped him, having sensed something strange in the air. His eyes widened as he realized the awful truth and murmured that the leader was not alone. The ground suddenly split open, and more giants rose from hidden spots, surrounding the leader like guardians or perhaps predators waiting for prey. It was a carefully planned trap. The horizon filled with an army of pale-faced giants wearing unsettling smiles as they encircled the knights from every side. Pellis froze in disbelief, stunned at the scale of the ambush, just as one of the giants grabbed a knight and crushed him effortlessly. Screams of horror echoed, while another giant devoured a knight with an expression of chilling calm. Blood splattered over the rocky ground as chaos swallowed the formation. Knights cried for help, their voices breaking under fear, while confusion overtook their ranks. One officer shouted a desperate order to retreat toward the mountain's base, but panic had already taken control. The disciplined line shattered instantly, and the knights scattered in terror as the giant army closed in around them. The giants charged forward in a savage sweep, tearing through the knights, bodies one after another. One knight fell screaming as a giant seized him, while his younger brother begged the monster to stop, only to be restrained by others who knew rushing in would only lead to another death. The younger soldier cried out desperately for his older brother as he was crushed beneath the giant's feet, turning the battlefield into a horrifying scene of blood and scattered limbs. Amid the chaos, Commander Pellis shouted orders for immediate retreat, insisting that this was a strict military command with no room for argument. He urged his men to live, reminding them of their families and promising that this was not the end, that they would regroup and return. The surviving knights fled toward the forest, running for their lives. Pellis turned to his aide, Falcon, entrusting him with guiding the retreat and protecting the remaining soldiers. Pellis then faced Subaru, who still stood unmoving in the carnage, and demanded that he escape as well, pleading with him to survive so he could help rebuild their force and face the giants another day. But Subaru drew his red glowing sword and cut him off coldly, saying that such a line should belong to him instead. He walked forward with steady steps toward the army of giants, moving against the flow of fleeing men, leaving Pellis frozen in disbelief at what this stranger intended to do. Subaru stopped briefly to address Pellis seriously, explaining that he couldn't fight freely with Pellis nearby, and that the knight had only two choices: leave immediately or die beside him. Pellis initially rejected the idea, shouting that he would never abandon someone and flee alone. Subaru's voice turned sharper as he told him not to make him repeat himself, Finally, Pellis relented with a trembling voice, promising to gather the others and begging Subaru to hold on until they returned. He sprinted away, shouting that he owed Subaru his life. Left alone, Subaru faced the advancing giants with their twisted smiles and towering bodies. He rushed toward them with his black sword in hand and stated calmly and firmly that he would be their opponent now. He darted between their legs with lightning speed, delivering precise, decisive strikes. 2 giants fell quickly, and the system chimed in with notifications announcing their defeat and granting achievement points. Even as he fought, Subaru admitted to himself that, test or not, the feeling of being the one left behind to buy time for others was still something he had not grown used to. Pellis, fleeing with the others, looked back toward the battlefield, sweat dripping down his face as guilt and fear hollowed his expression. The sight he saw was terrifying, a swarm of giants surrounding Subaru from every direction. Comments in the livestream called Subaru's choice suicide, insisting the numbers were too overwhelming and survival was impossible. But Subaru's mind was focused on something else entirely. He thought of Pellis, who, in the original timeline, was destined to die here, and realized that with his current power, he might be able to save him and change that fate. 2 giants lunged at him at once, but Subaru blocked and countered with a swift movement, slicing through the body of one giant. A notification flashed again, adding more points. His sword continued draining his stamina at a brutal pace, but each drop it devoured amplified his strength. Subaru spun through the battlefield like a tornado, cutting down giants one after another, telling himself they weren't too difficult individually. The real danger, he knew, was how long his body could endure the sword's demands. He changed tactics to improve his view of the battlefield and locate the boss. Leaping high into the air, he used the giants' bodies as stepping stones, beheading several from above as he moved. He pierced through their formation with fierce momentum, finishing with a powerful kick that shattered a giant's skull. Viewers filled the comments in awe, recognizing the aerial combat style that had once defined Narukami Subaru. The Wedge of Greed skill continued to resist some of the sword's side effects, and Subaru felt slight recovery in his health and mental strength, admitting silently that good equipment truly made a difference. Still, with an endless army of giants surrounding him, he identified his single objective. He had to defeat the boss before his body collapsed entirely. The giant leader appeared with a terrifying grin, eyes burning with savagery, raising his massive weapon with the intent to crush everything. He towered over Subaru, yet Subaru ran straight toward him with complete confidence. He understood clearly that if he failed to finish the fight in one instant, he would die here. Gathering all the strength he had left, Subaru activated the active skill of the lightning bolt armor, a shield of lightning, and prayed the move would work. Thunder roared violently as a colossal bolt of golden lightning struck the battlefield, illuminating the sky. The explosion of electricity paralyzed the surrounding giants, giving Subaru the moment he needed. He leapt from above and closed in on the boss, who roared in pain and rage. Subaru drove the cursed sword deep into the giant's neck and continued pushing the attack forward despite feeling his life force being torn from him at a reckless speed. Finally, the giant boss collapsed with a trembling crash. A system message appeared announcing the defeat of the giant seed and the clearing of the 5th survival stage, describing it as an extraordinary achievement. More notifications followed, stating that Subaru's level rose by 2 and his strength, agility, vitality, and magic increased. The stream exploded with astonishment as viewers asked if anyone had ever defeated this boss. The answer came back immediately. No one had. The stage wasn't designed to be cleared this way at all. Subaru looked down at his exhausted body and sighed, wishing he could have ended the fight with a single stylish blow like in comics, but reality proved much harsher. As the clouds above began to clear, the remaining giants staggered in confusion after their leader's death. Subaru landed heavily on the ground, panting. The Wedge of Greed had failed to fully block the sword's recoil, and the side effects were taking a painful toll. Then he realized something terrifying. The monsters hadn't disappeared. The rules stated that they remained until the test timer ended. The giants slowly regained their senses and turned their murderous gazes back on him. The very loophole Subaru had taken advantage of earlier had now turned against him. His strength was completely drained, and the giants surrounded him with their monstrous grins, closing in for the kill while he was too weak to defend himself. Just as one of the giants raised its massive fist to crush him, A devastating black and golden lightning bolt descended from the sky and struck Subaru directly, followed by an enormous explosion of energy. The scene drifted far from the battlefield to a quiet wooden cabin tucked deep inside a peaceful forest. A woman sat outside on a worn chair, letting the soft sunlight warm her face. When Shiger stepped out of the cabin and asked why she was sitting out alone, she replied gently that the weather was perfect and the air felt fresh, adding with a calm smile that moments like these were all they could enjoy for now. Shiger followed her gaze toward the distant tree line, agreeing in a serious tone and remarking that their remaining time was almost gone, 1 year at most. His features hardened as he declared that the time to end everything was finally approaching. Noticing Riena's focus fixed on her device rather than their conversation, Shiger sighed and pointed out that she always did this whenever things turned serious. Curious, he asked what she was looking at so intently, and she wordlessly held up her screen. She showed him a picture of a masked figure and told him this person had begun calling himself Narukami Subaru. Shiger's eyes widened instantly, and he burst out his name in shock, but Riina cut him off with a cold, steady voice, insisting that the person in the image was obviously not the Subaru they once knew. Riina played the livestream for him, explaining that the masked man was merely a streamer using the name while attempting the second-floor test. Shiger stared at the screen, stunned, as the fighter's movements stirred something painfully familiar. Riina reminded him firmly that if Subaru had truly survived that day, Kazuki would have been erased from the tower long ago. When Shiger asked what she meant, she answered with a sharp, sorrowful look, saying that Subaru was dead and it was time he accepted that truth. Shiger tried to shut down the conversation with a weary, just forget it, but Riina called his name sharply, asking how long he intended to keep hiding behind the memory of that boy. He replied coldly by asking why she even bothered watching the stream if she believed Subaru was gone. Riina answered flatly that she was just passing time, nothing more, but suddenly her eyes widened, freezing her in place. Shiger, startled by her reaction, looked at the screen himself and was struck silent as disbelief washed over him. Back at the battlefield, a deafening blast of golden lightning tore through the ground, sending giants flying like broken toys. As the dust thinned, Subaru appeared at the center of the devastation, wrapped in crackling electrical light. A system notification floated before him, announcing that he had obtained the Thunder skill. His eyes burned red beneath the mask as he received 2,000 achievement points and the options to continue the trial or transfer out, leaving the viewers in stunned silence. Subaru muttered in confusion, realizing this location wasn't supposed to be where the Thunder skill was learned. While the viewers speculated wildly, insisting that defeating the giant boss must have been the hidden condition, Subaru opened the description of the A+ rank Thunder skill, nodding grimly that it consumed both health and magic. And as the remaining giants started to reorganize themselves, he quietly thanked whatever luck had kept him alive up to this moment. Mission notifications and enormous donations poured in thousands of credits from excited followers. Subaru thanked everyone sincerely, and seeing his balance rise past 20,000, he decided he owed them at least a display of gratitude, so he prepared to fight again. The remaining giants roared and charged. Subaru wanted to show them something meaningful, so he spent 20,000 credits in a single breath to upgrade Wedge of Greed. The system declared that level 3 could now resist the violent backlash of thunder. Subaru wanted to flood his whole body with lightning, but caution won. He compressed all the energy into his right arm alone. With that, he shot forward like living lightning. The unknown demon sword in his hand erupted with destructive sparks as he ran toward the giants. Raising the blade high, Subaru declared that it was time to let loose a little, just like the old days, and slammed the sword down with brutal force. A massive rift of red and electric energy carved through the ground and split the giant formation apart. When the wave ended, Subaru stood panting heavily, sweat falling as he cursed his poor planning. He should have saved a little stamina for the trip back. Corpses of giants lay scattered everywhere. Subaru felt his body sway, leaning on the embedded sword for support, drained completely. Suddenly, the sound of armored footsteps echoed. A group of knights sprinted toward him, and Pellis, who had run all the way back, saw Subaru collapsing. Pellis cried out desperately, calling him the savior as he rushed forward. Subaru's vision blurred, and just before he hit the ground, he mumbled with a tired, sarcastic breath that Pellis was a fool for really returning. His consciousness slipped away just as Pellis caught him in his arms. Meanwhile, in the Suit and Entertainment office, Hatsuka stared tensely at her phone on the table while her manager and colleague Seong Hyun watched from behind, confused by her strange intensity. The manager asked if any of this was worth the trouble, but Seong Hyun quickly insisted that he didn't understand how women thought and shouldn't be the one questioned. Hatsuka hid her burning red face in her hands, groaning in embarrassment as she imagined the message she had sent earlier. She worried it sounded overly stiff and formal, wishing she had added at least a cute symbol or softer phrasing. She panicked that he might think it was a cold business request. Seong Hyun asked teasingly whether she was in love with this streamer, earning a furious outburst from her as she swore it was strictly business, though the problem came from a completely different angle. Her composure shattered as she suddenly admitted the truth. She had been an obsessed fan long before becoming his potential manager, and she couldn't help being nervous. The manager tried calming her, but abruptly remembered the crucial detail, the thunder skill that used to belong to Subaru Narukami alone. Hatsuka confirmed excitedly that the title was now shared by more than one person. Seong Hyun sighed with relief that their salaries were safe for now thanks to this discovery. The manager stroked his chin, deep in thought, murmuring that no wonder no one else had ever acquired that skill, and agreeing that this new candidate was worth close monitoring. Just then, Hatsuka's phone chimed, and she let out a joyful scream, announcing that Subaru Narukami had read their email. But the joy died instantly. Her expression froze, her body stiffened, and she went completely silent when she realized he had read the message but had not replied. She sat frozen like a stone statue while her colleagues exchanged sympathetic looks at the sight of her despair. Inside a high-tech studio filled with glowing monitors and advanced equipment, Hawkeye prepared to begin his next broadcast. He was known across the streaming world for his razor-sharp analysis and deep understanding of player combat, skills that allowed him to dominate the field and secure an unbeatable reputation. As he reviewed highlight clips of various players, he commented on Kurakawa Ammon, the newest addition to Blue Zone, calling him a dark horse climbing the tower at an unbelievable pace. He scrolled through images of veteran players as well, noting that Kazuki, once a member of the original Blue Eyes Guild, had recently been attracting attention again. But today, Hawkeye intended to shift his focus entirely. He told himself that this episode would center on a legend who transcended generations, Subaru Narukami. And no matter what anyone said, he insisted privately that the lightning skill belonged solely to that man. When the live stream began, Hawkeye greeted his viewers with energy and announced that they would be examining the most controversial player active today. He loaded the combat footage and asked everyone not to jump to conclusions. But within moments of watching, his confident expression cracked. Sweat gathered on his forehead as he leaned closer to the screen, muttering in disbelief about the level of concentration the newcomer displayed. He explained with rising amazement that the player had just learned the lightning skill, yet used it with precision far beyond normal human capability. Hawkeye pointed out how Subaru poured exactly the correct amount of power into his sword, no more, no less, and judged every situation with perfect clarity. According to him, that meant Subaru had not made a single misstep in the entire battle. He asked the chat where this monster had appeared from, noting that less than half the viewers even understood how extraordinary the footage truly was. Hawkeye finished his analysis with complete confidence, predicting that this boy would soon become a major name and that he himself would be watching closely. Then he paused and remembered his final thought. With a serious expression and a faint glow in his eyes, he declared that in terms of control alone, this new Subaru might actually surpass the original Subaru Narukami at his peak. Meanwhile, inside the tower's break room, Subaru woke up breathing heavily. System messages floated in front of him, informing him that the 6th stage was now on standby and his physical fatigue had been restored completely. Subaru decided to take a break rather than continue. The system required both the completion of the previous stage and 0 fatigue, a condition he had met physically, but his mind still felt drained. He picked up his device and thanked his viewers, surprised to see that the stream's audience had grown to 742 by the end. Shocked that the number had risen so much without him noticing, he apologized for stopping there and announced that he would rest for one day. The next stream, he promised, would resume the day after tomorrow. A system message confirmed the end of the broadcast, and Subaru left the room. He walked into the waiting area while checking his notifications, and one message in particular caught his eye. It was from someone named Hatatsuka, a manager from Suiten Entertainment, thanking him for his time and asking him to check his messages. The note mentioned that their company offered full support to streamers and ensured the highest profit margins in the industry. Subaru stared at his phone with suspicion, wondering if this was just typical spam. The name Sutin Entertainment felt unfamiliar. Later, he sat at an outdoor cafe with a quiet, old-fashioned atmosphere, sipping coffee while researching the company. He discovered that Sutin Entertainment was a massive, multi-channel network dedicated to managing streamers and investing heavily in their growth. The scale of it surprised him, and he muttered about how much the world had changed for such organizations to exist. He continued scrolling and found people discussing Hawkeye's recent analysis of him, debates about whether Subaru was Hawkeye's next target, and arguments over whether a newcomer could truly surpass the original Subaru Narukami in skill control. Others tried discrediting Hawkeye entirely, accusing him of bias because of his ties to Sutin. Subaru noted this new fact and blushed faintly as he murmured that the analyst certainly had a good eye. Outside the cafe, Isaac stood fuming as he read part of that same analysis, the one claiming the new Subaru might surpass Subaru Narukami's prime. His expression twisted with contempt as he muttered that Subaru was nothing but a rookie barely reaching the second floor. Rage boiled inside him. He cursed Hawkeye and swore he'd rip out those eyes once he cleared this stage. Still seething, Isaac pushed open the cafe door and grumbled about his terrible day, only for his gaze to fall on Subaru sitting casually at a table. Isaac smiled in bitter amusement, wondering if the universe was mocking him since Subaru seemed to appear everywhere he went. He walked past Subaru's table and slammed into it on purpose, knocking the hot coffee across Subaru's clothes. Subaru jerked up from the sudden burn, while Isaac feigned innocence and claimed it was an accident. Only then did he pretend to recognize Subaru and commented with a smug grin that he seemed to run into him quite often lately. He added mockingly that the second floor must indeed be small. With exaggerated generosity, Isaac said he'd buy Subaru another coffee since Subaru was always broke anyway. Subaru ignored him completely and turned away, causing Isaac to shout at him to stop. Subaru looked back with a cold, sharp stare that immediately irritated Isaac, who hated that expression. Subaru reminded him quietly that he had warned him last time, asking if Isaac had lost his mind to repeat the same behavior. Anger erupted inside Isaac. He grabbed Subaru's collar and called him scum, leaning close to threaten that he would crush him just like before, and that merely erasing that arrogant face wouldn't be enough. Subaru answered in a low, calm voice that he didn't have the patience for childish nonsense today. He grabbed Isaac's hand, peeled it off his collar, and squeezed with so much force that Isaac froze in shock, unable to understand how Subaru had become this strong. Subaru stepped back, telling Isaac coldly to consider this repayment for the spilled coffee and thanking him for the treat before walking out. Isaac shouted after him like a madman, demanding he return, but Subaru ignored him and left the cafe. Isaac cursed everything, Narukami Subaru, Haas, Subaru, the entire tower, feeling as though both versions of that name existed solely to torment him. Meanwhile, Subaru checked something on his tablet and suddenly remembered the message he had received earlier. He took out his phone, preparing to send a reply. Elsewhere, Hatetsuka was soaking in her bathtub, lazily tapping her rubber duck when her phone chimed. She glanced at the screen and instantly froze. Subaru had replied, promising a meeting soon. Her expression brightened with sudden excitement as she sat up, splashing water everywhere. Deep inside the exiled lizardman's dungeon, water dripped steadily through narrow canals, while the corpses of defeated monsters floated silently in the murky channels. Subaru stepped into the boss chamber with calm, measured footsteps, his sword glowing faintly with layered radiance as he prepared himself for the decisive encounter. A system prompt flickered before him, reporting that Wedge of Greed was resisting the vicious recoil of the cursed blade. Subaru told himself he was slowly adapting to this body's limits and rhythms. From the shadows, the salamander emerged, an enormous flame-covered beast crawling along the walls. Its shrill roar shook the chamber. Subaru decided to test his developing abilities carefully this time, mindful of the mishaps from earlier battles. He focused on controlling the thunder skill and gauging how far he could push his maximum output. He began channeling energy into his legs, enhancing his speed, and rushed toward the monster with sudden explosive acceleration. For a fleeting moment, his current figure overlapped with the ghost of his former self, moving with the same grace and certainty. Thunder surged through the cursed sword, forming a violent aura that sparked around the blade. Subaru propelled himself forward with supernatural force, cutting through air and flame alike, and collided against the salamander's attack with blinding sparks. System warnings blinked urgently, announcing that Wedge of Greed had failed to completely suppress the thunder backlash. The pain clawed through Subaru's body, but the skill leveled up in return, hardening its resistance. Subaru ignored the ache and pressed his assault. With one powerful, clean strike, he sliced through the salamander's burning form, detonating a burst of energy that shook the room. The system declared the dungeon cleared and awarded him new increases in strength, vitality, and magic. He exited the dungeon and walked through the dim forest, noticing that the stamina drain had been lighter than expected. He checked his fatigue index, 61. Understanding he could handle slightly higher output safely, he still felt a knot of tension in his chest. The upgrade cost for Wedge of Greed made him sigh bitterly. 40,000 credits was a brutal price, double what the previous level demanded. As he trudged along, he grumbled that it would be great if someone simply appeared and handed him a well-paying job. His wish ended as a joke the moment a voice cut through the trees, asking if he was out hunting. Subaru froze, immediately recognizing the unpleasant tone. Isaac emerged from between the shadows with a malicious smile, stepping toward him as though savoring the moment. Isaac remarked in a dark, mocking voice that they had known each other a long time, yet Subaru always managed to surprise him. Subaru only gave him a cold, bored stare, calling him persistent and annoying. Isaac confessed that he had thought long and hard, but his anger had festered far beyond what he could restrain. He stepped closer, suggesting with a threatening finality that they settle everything here and now. Subaru's expression didn't change. Instead, he gave a faint, sarcastic smile, as though this confrontation was expected or simply unimportant. Elsewhere beneath the night sky, Hawkeye walked through quiet streets and entered his usual cafe. As he ordered his drink, someone called his name. He turned to see Suiton Entertainment's manager seated nearby, claiming he had finally tracked him down. The two sat together, exchanging polite greetings. Hawkeye asked how the management work was going, and the manager answered calmly that steady, gradual growth was the healthiest kind. Then he turned the question back to Hawkeye, inquiring how his own live streams were doing. Hawkeye explained that his viewership remained stable since the major faces in the field rarely changed. Knowing this wasn't merely a casual visit, Hawkeye set aside his coffee and asked what the real purpose of the meeting was. The manager leaned forward and brought up Narukami Subaru, the rookie from Hawkeye's recent analysis. He wanted to know whether Hawkeye had been sincere in his praise. Hawkeye answered without hesitation, saying that the newcomer possessed raw talent even greater than the original Subaru Narukami's in terms of control. But he added sharply that whether such a player could actually climb the tower to similar heights was an entirely different question. The manager smiled, pleased with the clear and balanced assessment. He then revealed his goal, recruiting this rookie to their agency. Hawkeye laughed, praising his manager's intuition, though he pointed out that Subaru's view count and fame were still far too small for a company as large as Suiton. The manager placed his cup down and told him that Hawkeye's own conviction was enough to give him certainty. He then revealed his plan, a collaboration between Hawkeye and Subaru to boost Subaru's visibility. Back in the forest, Isaac confronted Subaru with renewed hostility. He mocked Subaru's survival in the dungeon, claiming it was nothing more than luck, and suggesting Subaru must have fled the moment he got hurt. He warned him not to delude himself into thinking he was the legendary Narukami Subaru, or that he could learn the thunder skill. His voice sharpened with hatred as he cursed Narukami Subaru's name, gripping Subaru's shoulder tightly. Isaac said bitterly that if the real Subaru was dead, he should remain quietly in his grave. His eyes burned red with hostility as he muttered that every person named Subaru had a talent for driving him insane. Subaru exhaled softly, almost sorrowfully, thinking of the cruel irony that the age following his death had become filled with imposters and imitators. Still, he wanted clarity. He asked Isaac directly why his hatred ran so deep. Was it really just because of the name Subaru? The idea seemed ridiculous to him, given how beloved the name had become. Isaac's fury detonated. He shouted in Subaru's face, demanding whether he dared say that while knowing who his father was. Subaru blinked with cold disinterest and asked what that had to do with anything, criticizing Isaac's habit of dragging his father into every conversation. Isaac snapped back that his father was Reinhardt. The name struck Subaru immediately. Reinhardt, the ninth-floor high ranker, the one-strike swordsman. His mind flashed back to the day the tower shook with shocking news. Earthling Subaru Narukami had defeated Reinhardt in a duel using only a single strike, ending the fight in less than 30 seconds. He remembered Reinhardt covered in blood, screaming in refusal as he fell into the crater left by Subaru's attack. Reality returned sharply as Isaac screamed in rage, calling Subaru a bastard and warning him not to speak his father's name lightly. Subaru finally understood. Isaac wasn't driven by personal hatred toward him, but by a broken legacy. His father's humiliation had carved hatred into his heart. Subaru looked at him with a cold, angry sharpness and asked whether Isaac had any idea what Subaru had suffered because of such a petty grudge. Isaac's fury exploded. He commanded Subaru to shut up, refusing to hear another word, and flames erupted around his body as he prepared to strike. He released his fiery power with a roar, saying there was no need for further conversation, and ordered Subaru to hurry up and die. The flames rose higher as Isaac's rage spiraled out of control. He shouted hysterically that he hated Narukami Subaru to the point of feeling sick. His voice cracked with malice as he continued complaining that Subaru was nothing special, yet somehow drew all the attention and strutted around arrogantly, poisoning even the guild leaders with the same attitude. With a twisted smile framed by fire, Isaac added that Shad and Freude, those he called arrogant, were now rotting in hell, which he claimed was the justice they deserved. He hurled a massive fireball toward Subaru, declaring that receiving the Subaru name had been the last of his luck. The explosion shook the entire forest, engulfing the area in smoke and fire. Isaac covered his face with one hand, pretending to regret his own carelessness, lamenting dramatically that he had accidentally overdone it and killed his friend in such a horrible manner. Staring at his charred hand, Isaac muttered coldly that his next target would be that masked streamer. But then a voice echoed through the flames, asking calmly which masked one he was referring to. Isaac froze. The fire parted like a curtain, revealing Subaru walking out unharmed, holding the mask in one hand and staring at him coldly, asking whether he meant this mask. Isaac's eyes stretched wide, horrified at the sight before him, whispering that it was impossible. He screamed in panic, unable to understand how Subaru could take a direct hit from such a powerful attack without even being scorched. Before Isaac could recover, Subaru moved like a flash and rammed a brutal punch into his face, asking mockingly if the sensation was uncomfortable and calling him a brat throwing a tantrum. Subaru didn't stop. He followed with another crushing blow to Isaac's torso, forcing a groan from deep inside him. Then he slammed Isaac into the ground so hard that Isaac cried out in agony. Isaac staggered, coughing blood, unable to comprehend how someone he viewed as weak could inflict such damage. Subaru stood over him and offered a riddle, asking who exactly was standing before him. He lifted the mask and asked whether Isaac saw the bullet Subaru or the masked streamer Narukami Subaru. Then his eyes glowed sharply, and he added a third option, the Narukami Subaru with blue eyes. Isaac forced himself upright, coughing violently, refusing to fall for such tricks. He claimed Subaru had just confessed to being the streamer. His energy flared again as he scoffed at the thunder skill, declaring it wasn't impressive if someone like Subaru could learn it. Fiery claws formed at his hand as he asked with contempt whether Subaru really thought he could win. He boasted arrogantly that if someone as weak as Subaru had acquired that legendary skill, then he must have already surpassed the original Narukami Subaru. He launched forward with blazing fire, screaming triumphantly that he would prove it. But Subaru vanished and reappeared in a flash of lightning. A single sword arc cut through the air, and Isaac didn't even comprehend what happened until he saw his severed hand falling. Shock distorted his face as Subaru stepped closer. Subaru told him coldly that his answer was wrong and expressed genuine surprise that Isaac could spew nonsense so far removed from reality. A creeping terror climbed Isaac's spine. He looked up at Subaru, finally realizing something was terribly wrong. Subaru's earlier words echoed, about Isaac's petty hatred, about Subaru's suffering caused by such a childish grudge. Subaru placed the blade against Isaac's neck and with burning fury warned him never to speak lightly of his comrades again. Isaac's eyes bulged with fear as his trembling voice muttered the truth he could no longer deny, that the person standing before him was the legendary blue-eyed Narukami. Subaru cut off his realization with icy finality, declaring that playtime was over. In one swift, decisive motion, Subaru ended the fight. Isaac stumbled, blood erupting from the wound, while Subaru told him that this was more than enough thanks for lending him the body. Then Subaru turned and walked away from the blazing ruin, leaving Isaac's defeated form behind. Far from the scorched forest, inside a peaceful cafe, an employee watched Subaru from across the room with cautious curiosity. She wondered quietly whether he was simply an overzealous fan of Narukami Subaru, but scolded herself for such thoughts. She noticed he seemed to be streaming at the moment. Meanwhile, Subaru was deep in thought about his streamer strategy. He reminded himself that hiding his real face was a massive advantage. It prevented enemies from identifying him. Hatsuka approached hesitantly, apologizing for being late. Her cheeks burned red as she introduced herself as the person he had contacted, adding nervously that she was Hatsuka, the manager assigned to him. Subaru shook her hand calmly and introduced himself as Narukami Subaru, making her nearly burst with excitement as she insisted the honor was hers. She stared at his masked face, marveling at how startlingly similar he was to the legendary Subaru, wondering if he had returned from the dead, or if this boy was simply a very convincing imposter. Her thoughts spiraled until Subaru suddenly asked loudly whether something was wrong, startling her so much she nearly jumped. She remembered her boss scolding her repeatedly, reminding her to leave a strong, trustworthy first impression and never behave irresponsibly. Realizing she had likely ruined that already, she tensed. Subaru then asked if she had been a fan of the old Narukami Subaru. Hatsuka immediately, and explosively, declared that she was an extremely devoted one. Subaru tried calming her down, explaining that he wasn't the real hero and gently pointing out she looked much younger anyway. But she shocked him by saying she was also a fan of him. She excitedly explained that she had followed him since he had 0 viewers, had been his very first watcher when he defeated the Bat, passed Greg's trial, and chose the lightning path, all things she remembered in vivid detail. Subaru was stunned. She recalled moments he himself had nearly forgotten. He smiled beneath the mask, impressed that she had been watching even then. With shining eyes, Hatsuka clenched her fist and said this was destiny. For that reason, she had run straight to the company and begged to be assigned as his manager. Regaining control, she adopted a more serious posture and pulled out the contract she had prepared, summarizing its terms. Their team would handle ads and edit clips to strengthen the Narukami brand. Subaru asked what his side required. She answered simply that he only needed to keep streaming as he was, that alone was valuable enough. Subaru wondered aloud whether the streaming job was really this easy. Hatsuka explained that he was special. He was the first to wield the lightning skill, and everyone at Suiten, even her department head, saw him as a top priority. While reading the contract, Subaru asked her about her opinion of the terms. Hatsuka panicked, thinking he was questioning her competence. She stammered that everyone else was more reliable and professional than her, but Subaru clarified he hadn't meant that. He studied the faint aura around her, wondering if it was normal for a business manager to possess such a high-level skill. Hatsuka, meanwhile, was dying internally, convinced she had completely failed. Subaru realized what that aura meant. As his fame grew, the enemies he would face would only get more dangerous. There would be no time for rest. He had to stay ahead. Hatsuka sat stiffly, cheeks on fire, forcing herself to maintain a professional image. But anxiety thundered inside her. What if Subaru rejected the offer? Her mind raced so wildly that she half-seriously wondered whether she should force him to sign if necessary. At that exact moment, Subaru appeared beside her and extended his hand for a handshake. She shot upright in shock, letting out a panicked scream full of stuttering. All the emotional balance Hatsuka had tried to maintain vanished instantly. Subaru sat across from her with complete calmness and asked politely that she look after him in their upcoming work. She stared at his extended hand, at the quiet glow of his eyes behind the mask, and instead of responding like a trained professional, she grabbed his hand with both of hers and burst into tears, shouting with overwhelming enthusiasm that she should be the one asking him to take care of her. Later that day, Subaru began his stream. The system window shimmered into view, announcing the start of the broadcast, and at that exact moment the viewer count jumped to 703. Messages flooded the chat, greeting Narukami and bombarding him with questions about the mask. Subaru immediately noticed the unusually high numbers and understood at once that this sudden surge came from Hatsuka's promotions and early advertising. Without wasting a second, he held his phone with seriousness and announced the beginning of the 6th stage, titled The Legend ***. The scene shifted to a stormy night deep within the forest, where rain hammered the tents and weapons lay stacked in piles beside muddy walkways. Inside the command tent, Several armored knights gathered around a map while thunder rumbled outside. Commander Pellis asked sharply where their savior was. One knight voiced his doubts openly, saying it was impossible to trust someone who wasn't even a knight, and even harder to believe that an unknown outsider could defeat the giant leader alone. He continued speculating that unless Pellis had seen the battle himself, the monster Subaru killed might not have been the real leader at all. Pellis's expression darkened at those words, and he scolded his men harshly for disrespecting the person who had saved their lives. At that moment, the tent flap lifted and Subaru entered, accompanied by Pellis's aide, who announced with a bright smile that the savior had awakened. Pellis hurried towards Subaru, greeting him gratefully and saying that thanks to his efforts, he could now walk without any support. But the other knights stared at Subaru with quiet hostility, whispering among themselves that he didn't look particularly strong and that the mask only made him more suspicious. Subaru caught their expressions instantly and confronted them with a cold tone, saying it seemed they either refused to believe he had slain the monster or simply could not accept the truth. He remembered how Hatetsuka had adjusted his microphone settings so that only viewers could hear his voice, an incredibly useful trick in boring or irritating conversations. Even with that advantage, the knights' tone irritated him, and he commented sharply on their lack of respect toward someone who had saved their entire order. The chat erupted with laughter and mocking remarks about the knights, urging Subaru not to tolerate their arrogance. Then an older knight stepped forward, a man with a gray beard and a dignified presence. His name was Dale. He extended his hand to Subaru and thanked him sincerely, but Subaru felt the extreme pressure hidden beneath the handshake. Dale spoke with a heavy voice, explaining that although he had tried to protect the village, everything had been trampled and crushed. Subaru blinked in surprise at the word trampled, and Dale answered with a grim expression that it had been done by that man. Subaru looked into his eyes with seriousness and asked if there existed someone more dangerous than the giant leader he had already defeated. Dale answered simply and confidently, yes. He then began describing an ancient legend. The true giants, the ones who once battled the gods, had long been sealed away. The giants that roamed these lands were only faint remnants, shadows of their former selves. But the new leader who appeared after Subaru's victory was different. His strength neared that of the legendary giants, and Dale admitted with horror that he never imagined any of those beings still existed. The chat exploded with panic, viewers asking if this level of power belonged to something around the 8th floor, and how anyone was supposed to fight it. Subaru declared with firm resolve that they had no choice but to defeat the creature. Dale gave him a tight, sarcastic smile, commenting on his excessive confidence. Another knight added sharply that although they were forced to request help, what they were asking Subaru to do was impossible. He insisted that anyone who hadn't seen that monster with their own eyes would never understand. Pellis suddenly cut through the tension with a loud declaration. He spoke of an ancient legend involving Millennium Mountain. At its peak, he said, a fragment of lightning was hidden, something powerful enough to fight the giants, and he believed Subaru was the only person capable of finding it. The scene shifted to a memory, burning houses, screaming civilians, and fire swallowing everything in sight. Amid the destruction stood a long-haired giant, radiating a terrifying aura as he addressed someone named Vittel. Knights tried desperately to stop him, but he grabbed one of them without hesitation and crushed him in his hand. In a cold voice, he declared that he would send his son Vittel to rest among the flowing human blood. High above the battlefield, Subaru's golden eye glowed as he watched the horrifying scene from afar. The live chat erupted in disbelief, questioning whether this massive creature was truly a giant and how such a being could exist at all. Subaru urged his horse forward through the raging storm, the hooves splashing through mud and water as lightning split the sky overhead. The cold wind sliced across his face, and he understood with complete seriousness that this stage was no mere trial. It was designed to kill anyone unprepared. Pellis' voice echoed in his memory, reminding him that the giants would arrive in 3 days, and if he failed to find the lightning by then, he should run for his life without hesitation. But Subaru pushed onward, refusing to accept retreat. He leaned close to the horse's neck as they raced across the forest, telling himself that the lightning's power was not optional. It was the one key he absolutely needed to stand against the giants, and possibly the only reason he had been sent into this nightmare of a test. A system window suddenly opened in front of his eyes, asking whether he wanted to retry the stage. Subaru declined immediately and declared with firm confidence that there was no test in this entire tower that he could not overcome. He realized too late that the line he used was a phrase deeply associated with the old Subaru Narukami, and viewer comments instantly pointed it out, teasing him for repeating a legend's catchphrase. Requests began pouring in, with Safe Origin offering him 3,000 credits at once. Subaru let out a small sigh of relief, grateful that the slip had not exposed too much, at least not yet. He tightened his grip on the reins and continued forward, guiding the horse up the rocky paths until he reached the base of the towering Millennium Mountain. After dismounting, he placed his hand against the icy stone, feeling the rough surface and confirming inwardly that the lightning fragment was indeed somewhere inside this massive structure. His thoughts drifted back to his conversation with Pellis. The knight had told him the legend was ancient. No one knew whether the lightning fragment was a power, an object, or even a living being. Subaru remembered asking how one was supposed to find it, only to receive a frustrating explanation that the mountain's location and the inherited tale were the only clues they had. But Pellis had said something with absolute certainty. Whoever held the lightning last had wiped out the giants of the past. The narrative shifted to Hatetsuka's home, where she burst into explosive joy the moment the contract was officially confirmed. She danced around her apartment while her boss chuckled over the call, praising her for finally acting like a dependable manager. She hesitated for a moment, asking if that meant she was really being complimented, and her boss reassured her before trying to continue the conversation about a future meeting with Hawkeye. But she hung up immediately, too excited to sit still. Hatetsuka threw herself onto her bed, deciding her reward would be a peaceful moment watching Subaru's stream after her hectic day. Her eyes sparkled as she stared at her phone, claiming that seeing him live on screen while knowing she had met him in person was a unique kind of joy that only true fans could understand. On the screen, Subaru appeared, repeating the line that there was no test in the tower he couldn't clear. Hatsuka froze instantly. Her smile faded as realization washed over her. That sentence wasn't some random expression. It was a phrase engraved in the memories of players for more than 20 years. Doubt wrapped around her like a cold fog as she wondered why those exact words had come from his mouth so naturally. Back at the mountain, Subaru struck the rock wall with his fist. Viewers typed rapidly, questioning whether he had lost his reasoning or simply become desperate. But Subaru continued hammering the wall again and again, sweat and rain mixing on his skin as he challenged the mountain itself, daring it to show which of them possessed greater resolve. He clenched his jaw and prepared himself mentally, deciding that even if this required breaking stone with his bare hands, he would fight until the very end. Rock fragments burst outward as Subaru continued striking the mountain wall, each punch wrapped in a glow of raw energy. Sparks flickered around his knuckles, and with one final blow, the stone split open with a deep crack, collapsing outward in a shower of debris. Subaru smiled with quiet triumph, announcing to himself that he had finally found the entrance. Comments on the stream erupted in disbelief at his brute force method, but Subaru answered silently that the stream couldn't transmit the feeling in his hands, and that, in the end, no one had ever said strength wasn't the correct solution. He stood beneath the storm, sensing a thunderous force calling to him from deep within the mountain, as if the lightning hidden here were reaching out to the lightning sleeping inside him. When he cleared away the rubble, a massive gate of dark metal came into view, decorated with ancient patterns and runes. Everything suggested the power he sought waited behind that door. Viewers questioned how he planned to open something so huge without a key, but Subaru made his decision instantly. He would break it. He triggered Wedge of Greed at level 3, feeling the skill brace against the violent recoil of the cursed sword as he began building lightning inside his fist. Black and gold arcs of energy gathered at his knuckles, and Subaru sensed that the true trial lay beyond this door. He felt the lightning calling him more urgently than ever, as if demanding his answer. So he gave it one. He pulled all the energy into his arm and, with a sharp breath, drove a devastating punch into the gate, declaring that he was responding to the lightning summons. A blast of golden light exploded outward. The mountain trembled as the gate split, then slowly opened, revealing a long, dark passage stretching into the mountain's core. Subaru stepped forward with unwavering confidence while the chat buzzed with astonishment over how he seemed to grow stronger every minute. A system prompt appeared announcing his entry into the path where lightning walks, warning him that he would not be able to leave until he completed the stage. Meanwhile, tension grew heavy in the Knight's camp. Around the strategy table, one knight asked if Subaru truly had a chance at reaching the lightning. Pellis, calm and certain as he lifted his drink, replied that Subaru had already shown more than enough strength, and that doubting him now served no purpose. Yet unease lingered in the tent. One knight suddenly slammed both hands on the table, his face twisted with panic. He shouted that none of it mattered, whether Subaru succeeded or failed, because they were all doomed either way. His voice trembled, recalling the hulking figure he had seen crushing men like insects in the village. He insisted that no human could face such a being. Pellis tried to steady him, reminding him that surrendering before the fight even began was the same as accepting death. He asked the knights to trust Subaru just once, since Subaru was risking everything for them despite having no reason to. But the terrified knight stared at him with wide, bloodshot eyes, his lip bleeding from how hard he had bitten it, whispering that Pellis was speaking far too easily for someone who hadn't stood directly under that monster's shadow. Before Pellis could reply, the ground beneath them shook violently. A cup toppled from the table, shattering on the floor, and the tent went silent. A soldier burst inside, screaming that disaster had struck. The creature had arrived. Pellis and the others froze, robbed of words as the weight of the news settled over them. Back inside the mountain, Subaru walked deeper into a barren stone corridor, wondering what the test intended to measure. Viewers remarked on how strange the environment was. There were no monsters, no traps, not even a single obstacle. But Subaru's golden eye sharpened with understanding. Lightning was too fast to see. Before it became a bolt, it lingered as invisible charges drifting through the air. A test based on lightning would never rely on sight. So it made perfect sense that nothing visible stood before him. He closed his eyes, finally grasping the meaning behind the name of this place. The path where lightning walks would not be seen, it had to be sensed. He felt the deep, slumbering energy ahead of him tugging on him like a current. Suddenly he crouched, grabbed a stone, and hurled it down the tunnel. Chat messages filled the screen asking what he was doing, but Subaru explained inwardly that the stream could never show this. The rock began breaking apart midair before ever hitting the ground, its surface crumbling under the invisible electric charge saturating the cave. The viewers could only hear the violent sounds tearing through the darkness, and their comments reflected pure confusion as they tried to understand what kind of trial produced lightning they could hear but not see. Subaru finally grasped the true structure of this trial. Even knowing how unforgiving it was, he muttered that he had no option but to continue, calling the designer of this stage someone with absolutely terrible taste. He broke into a run, deducing that this place wasn't a puzzle at all but a merciless endurance test. The rule was extremely simple: endure or die. Bolts of electricity lashed through the air as Subaru moved forward, and a cheerful donation popped up in the corner of the screen. One viewer sent 100 credits just to mockingly ask him what he was so scared of. More contributions followed as the storm intensified. Someone tossed him 1,000 credits. Another warned that the lightning he had learned might vanish if he failed, and a third sent 2,000 credits cheering him on. Even as the air crackled and his skin tingled painfully, Subaru still remembered to thank every supporter, his gaze fierce with determination while he ran through the invisible storm. Far away, in a quiet wooden cabin warmed by a boiling pot, Shigeru lounged on the sofa trying to rest. Riina suddenly entered the room, making him jolt upright and shove his device out of sight. She eyed him with a sly grin, claiming he must be hiding something suspicious. Shigeru stammered frantically that nothing was going on and his eyes were simply tired. She didn't believe a word of it. Sitting next to him, she teased him with a dramatic tone, saying strange habits always made hair grow faster, pushing Shigeru to yell at her to stop saying such bizarre things. Riina tore off a piece of bread and casually mentioned that she had stopped watching the stream because he told her to, but admitted she still couldn't resist checking sometimes. When Shigeru asked nervously what she wanted, she turned toward him and asked whether her presence was preventing him from relaxing. Before he could think of a reply, Subaru's voice leaked loudly from the device he had tried to hide, declaring that he would endure the test and do his best. Shigeru shot up in panic and shouted at her again, begging her not to say such things at that exact moment. Riina covered her ears, complaining that his yelling almost burst her eardrum, while Shigeru fumbled to switch his device to silent mode. She stared at him suspiciously, remarking that he was acting far more strangely than usual and calling him a complete weirdo before standing up abruptly. When she announced in boredom that this entire situation was annoying and moved to leave, Shigeru nearly leapt after her, scrambling to keep her inside. He offered her more bread, suggested she stay and rest, and even insisted she make herself comfortable, anything to divert attention from the stream he was hiding. But Riina closed the door behind her, and Shigeru collapsed back into the sofa with a shaky sigh of relief, mumbling that he had almost been exposed. He lifted the tablet again, revealing Subaru's live stream still running, and muttered that if Riina ever found out he had been watching it, she would never let him hear the end of it. He didn't even want to imagine that chaos. Shigeru looked sadly at the screen as Subaru explained the deadliness of the test, and a faint smile touched his lips as he realized how similar this streamer sounded to the real Subaru he had known long ago. Only one thing felt different to him. The old Subaru had never been this desperate about collecting credits. Shigeru laughed weakly at the absurdity of it all, until a cold hand gripped his shoulder. He turned slowly, dread rising inside him, and found Riina standing behind him with a terrifying smile. She asked in a low voice if he truly believed she hadn't noticed. Her expression twisted into a demonic glare as she declared that trying to fool her was 1,000 years too early for him. Deep inside Millennium Mountain, the system prompted Subaru with a new message, ordering him to carve the path of lightning. Sweat streamed down his face as he stood alone in the heart of the storm. Bolts crashed into his body one after another, circling him like enraged serpents while the progress bar crept forward at a painfully slow pace, barely reaching 2.3%. He lifted his hand, which was already glowing with compressed lightning, and sensed a strangely nostalgic stir in his chest. He knew this sensation well. He had walked beside lightning through countless battles in his previous life. But this time was different. Every step he attempted forward made the air denser, the pain sharper, and the electric bombardment more violent. His vision flickered behind the mask as the bar crawled to 3.22%, reminding him mercilessly that this trial was far from over. Meanwhile, comments flooded the stream. Viewers screamed at him to run, begged him to speed up, questioned why he insisted on walking as if he were choosing to suffer. Subaru ignored all of it. His body was covered in wounds, and every nerve felt as though it was being carved open. But he accepted that reading chat was impossible from this point forward. He extended his arm into the electrified void, reminding himself that reaching the end was nothing more than a baseline for him. His real aim was higher, far beyond simply clearing the stage. If lightning demanded everything from him, he intended to take something even greater in return. Far away, in the polished silence of a luxury office, Hawkeye leaned forward toward his screens. Several monitors displayed Subaru's stream from different angles, and he recalled his earlier discussion with President John about collaborating with this rising newcomer. He also remembered how unusual it was for John to personally oversee anything anymore. John had reminded him of a rule he'd repeated for years. In broadcasting, effort is only half the battle. Status and recognition make up the rest. Hawkeye had interrupted him proudly, explaining that a player's background, the era they belong to, the names and powers surrounding them, determines true popularity. John had agreed but quickly pointed out that Narukami Subaru's streams didn't resemble ordinary beginner broadcasts. They looked far closer to the personal combat journals of seasoned veterans. John emphasized that the boy didn't need fancy editing or a dramatic persona. Hawkeye simply needed to provide his usual analytical commentary like he always did. The president suggested that this newcomer might be an opportunity that couldn't be replaced, urging Hawkeye to grab the passing comet while he could. Hawkeye's eyes had glittered with ambition as he remembered his own insecurities, those moments when he retreated, not because he lacked talent, but because he doubted whether he could ever compete with the geniuses climbing the tower. He remembered staring at the night sky, yearning to stand among the shining legends above, wondering if he would ever be counted among them. And returning to the present, he suddenly shrieked in disbelief, nearly knocking over his chair. Sweat ran down his temples as he stared at the screen, unable to accept the madness Subaru was committing. Inside the cave, Subaru's scream echoed through the corridor as lightning struck him with brutal force. The entire environment roared violently, turning the path into a torture chamber of light and sound. Blood trickled down his limbs while the relentless assault continued to hammer him from every direction. Even so, Subaru planted his foot into the ground with all the strength he had left, refusing to bend, refusing to fall. He forced himself forward step by agonizing step. He finally grasped the essence behind the trial, The stronger the lightning became, the deeper it carved its way into his body. That was the design, that was the intention, and that was exactly what he needed. Lightning surged around him, forming a colossal aura that wrapped his entire figure. Subaru decided that this massive flow of power had reached the threshold he needed. Fine streaks of energy began appearing beneath his skin like glowing lines etched throughout his body. A system message explained that the smallest meridian channels, tiny pathways scattered through his body, including the Ren and Du channels, had begun filling with lightning. When the energy finally reached his heart, it lit up like a burning core. The progress bar leaped from its sluggish crawl to a sharp 20.7%, and a diagram of Subaru's body unfolded before him. The system announced that the micromeridian activation had begun. Lightning visibly settled inside his frame, stabilizing, strengthening, and a message appeared calmly that his magic is increased by +1. Subaru tightened his lightning-soaked fist, vowing inwardly that no matter how brutal the price became, he would master this power completely. He reminded himself of the structure of the body, how the Ren and Du channels formed the two main pathways of inner energy, and how the micromeridians were the countless thin networks branching through every corner of his form. As he staggered forward through the storm, he felt lightning circulating wildly inside him, reaching places no energy had ever touched before. He understood then that the old body of Haas Subaru had never once undergone proper purification. Now, instead of following the usual slow and safe method using one's own mana, he was forcing the process using raw lightning, a shortcut so violent that a new negative status appeared on the system window: electric shock. He pushed forward anyway, even as whole waves of electricity ravaged him from the inside. His muscles trembled uncontrollably and blood splattered across the cold stone, yet he stubbornly refused to fall. He knew purification through natural mana would have hurt, but never like this. This was something different. It was as if the lightning was tearing apart the impurities inside him with claws, carving channels open by force, and every second felt like needles driven deep into bone. Across the city in the darkness of her room, Hatsuka sat frozen while watching the stream. She held her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her breath hitched when she finally understood what Subaru was attempting. She murmured in disbelief that he was force-opening his micromeridians inside this environment and doing it while still moving. She knew enough to understand how insane that decision was. For most people, this degree of torture would have made them collapse unconscious over and over, even though the test itself wasn't reality. The pain, however, was real. Pain the brain recognized instantly. Pain the nerves could not distinguish from real life. She pressed a hand against her forehead, torn between fear and confusion, trying to grasp what reason could push him to choose something so self-destructive. The scene returned to the cave, where the system now declared that more than half the micromeridians had been activated. Subaru's foot, wrapped in lightning, dragged forward slowly as if each step demanded every piece of strength left inside him. The agony grew sharper, gnawing at the edges of his consciousness until he felt the world tilt and distort. His thoughts began to slip. He muttered to himself that every terrible thing that had happened was his fault, that he was the one who had led them to their deaths. The cave blurred, and in its place, he found himself standing in a blizzard of white snow. A memory resurfaced. He had been standing proudly before his companions, insisting with a confident grin that there was no test he could not clear. He could see each of them clearly: Shuhei, Soya, Kei, Yori, and even Shigeru and Riina, smiling behind him with complete trust. They had believed him when he told them not to worry, and when he promised that victory was guaranteed because he was leading them. That bright memory twisted with pain. Reality snapped over it like shattering glass. If he hadn't spoken so arrogantly back then, if he hadn't pushed them forward with his overconfidence, then none of them would have had to die that day. The guilt stabbed so deeply he nearly lost his breath. Kazuki suddenly appeared before him in the hallucination, his face drenched in blood, an ugly smile twisting his features. He mocked Subaru with biting cruelty, saying their failure had been inevitable because they were too full of pride and blind self-belief. Subaru's heart convulsed with the weight of those words. Lightning raged around him as he cried out, admitting in a voice shaking with sorrow and regret that everything truly had been his responsibility. His legs finally gave out. He collapsed to the floor, the storm crackling viciously over his body, and stretched a trembling hand toward the empty air. His mind continued dragging him deeper into old regrets as the electric pain surged through every part of him. Everything shifted in an instant. The The suffocating darkness of the cave vanished, replaced by a calm green meadow bathed in warm sunlight. Subaru blinked in confusion, unable to understand how he had moved from the storm into this peaceful plain. A soft breeze brushed against his hair, and when he looked toward the horizon, he noticed a familiar group gathered beneath a large shade tree. His breath caught. Shuhei, Soya, Kei, Yori, Shiger, and Reina, every single one of them sat together casually, chatting as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Subaru's heart nearly burst with emotion. He sprinted toward them, hope swelling in his chest, wondering if everything, every death, every nightmare, had merely been a horrible dream. When he reached them, tears formed at the edges of his eyes, and he smiled so brightly it almost hurt. He placed a trembling hand on one friend's shoulder, murmuring with relief that the nightmare had been disgusting but false, and he begged them to listen to him about the dream. Someone called his name, Subaru. But as soon as he turned, their faces twisted. Warm smiles warped into grotesque expressions full of hatred and suffering. Their voices rose in a harsh chorus accusing him directly of leading them to destruction. One voice trembled with anger, shouting that they never wanted to die. Subaru staggered backward, whispering their names in disbelief as terror crawled up his spine. Shino stepped forward, her body torn as if she had crawled out of her own death. She fixed him with a resentful stare and berated him bitterly, reminding him of all the bold promises he had sworn before the tragedy. She demanded to know why he hadn't protected them. Subaru's lips trembled as he whispered her name, horrified by the sight of her remaining eye bulging with pain. The peaceful meadow melted away into utter hell. Corpses and tattered spirits surrounded him, screaming and crying out. Flames rose all around as their voices clawed into him, begging him to save them, begging not to die. Subaru's mind crumbled under the weight of their grief and blame. He screamed in despair, reaching desperately toward their fatting figures, begging them to come back, begging them not to leave him behind. His voice echoed endlessly, swallowed by a void that didn't care for his suffering. He collapsed to his knees, broken and drowning in guilt. Then the hallucination shattered. Subaru found himself back in the electrified cave, coughing blood as he gasped for breath. The storm still raged around him. His entire body quaked, and only then did he understand how close he had come to losing his mind entirely. The system window blinked before him, stating that micromeridian purification had reached 97.87%, and that lightning had now fully settled inside him, increasing his magic again. He gritted his teeth and cursed whoever had created such a deranged trial. Slowly, he pushed himself upright. The swirling electric currents lit his body in bright gold, and despite everything, he let out a bitter laugh, thanking the hallucination in a twisted way for reminding him why he refused to die. Yellow sparks danced across his arms, and in the flickering light, he momentarily saw Kazuki's phantom smirking back at him, an illusion that felt far too real. Far away, chaos devoured the village. Giants and monsters surged into the arena, crushing buildings and sending villagers fleeing in panic while the knights struggled to hold their positions. A colossal giant, towering above the ruins with monstrous features and bulging muscles, stepped forward like a walking catastrophe. Even the bravest knights trembled at the sight, unable to believe this creature was the true boss. Fear seeped into them, and whispers spread that the masked warrior must have abandoned them and run away. Amid that despair, one knight whispered shakily to his companion that their savior would return. He had to return. They clung to that sliver of hope. Pellis, however, exploded with anger. He shouted at his men for doubting the very person to whom they had entrusted their village's fate, even without knowing his name. His eyes blazed with disappointment as he barked that their behavior was disgraceful, questioning how they dared call themselves knights. Dale stepped forward calmly and placed a steady hand on Pellis' shoulder. His voice carried deep conviction as he reminded everyone that before they blamed anyone else, they must remember their own oath. It was their duty to protect this land. With slow determination, he drew his sword, blue energy shimmering along its length, and declared that knights were never meant to be protected. They existed to protect others. Dale charged forward without hesitation, his sword raised high as he called out to his men to meet death as true knights if that was what fate demanded today. His roar cut through the storm of fear, and the rest of the soldiers followed him with fierce war cries, their armor clashing as they surged toward the battlefield. Inside the mountain, Subaru's world was nothing but blinding light and pain. The progress bar flickered at 99%, and the yellow lightning wrapped around him grew denser, almost solid in form. Just ahead of him, a small orb of golden light floated like a suspended sun. Even without knowing what it truly was, Subaru understood instantly. This was the end of the path. His fatigue index spiked to 97. His vision blurred until blood trickled from behind his mask, but he forced his legs to move. One more step. That was all he needed. Ignoring the furious red warnings flashing across the system interface, shouting that further movement would be fatal, Subaru pushed off the ground in a final reckless leap toward the glowing sphere. Far away in the village, an armored boot crashed into the earth. Dale had reached the giant. Despite his age, he moved with impossible sharpness, weaving between the monster's colossal swings and closing in with refined precision. His blade carved a streak of blue light across the giant's flesh, forcing a roar of agony from its mouth. Dale didn't slow, he tore into the creature again and again with relentless skill. Pellis saw his opening and bellowed for Dale to let him handle the rest. With all his strength, he sprinted forward, leapt into the air, and raised his sword high. Energy crackled around him as he brought down a chain of decisive strikes on the giant's exposed weaknesses. A final roar echoed across the battlefield before the monster's body collapsed in a heap, blood spraying across the broken ground. The soldiers erupted into cheers, shouting Pellis's name and praising Dale. Some rushed to the fallen monster, stabbing its corpse to release the hatred and terror that had built up inside them. At last, they believed the nightmare was over. Pellis exhaled deeply, staring at the dead giant and thinking they had finally survived the danger Dale warned them about. But Dale's voice cut sharply through the relief. He denied it outright, his expression twisted with dread. Pellis turned to him in disbelief, only for Dale to repeat firmly that this was not the real target. Behind them, the soldiers were laughing and celebrating, convinced the rest of the mission would be easy. One soldier spoke confidently about eliminating the remaining small giants. And then a giant hand dropped from the sky. The soldier, the ground, the celebration, everything beneath the descending palm was crushed in an instant. Blood splashed outward in a gruesome burst as the earth cratered beneath the impact. Pellis and Dale both froze where they stood, shock locking their bodies in place. Only when Dale's voice finally tore free did the others understand. Trembling, he stared up at the monstrous silhouette towering above them, declaring that this was the true giant. Pellis's voice cracked as he screamed to the others that the power level of this creature was unlike anything they had encountered before. Meanwhile, deep within the lightning path, Subaru reached the very limit of human endurance. The progress bar trembled at 99.99%. He extended his hand into the raging golden storm and closed his fingers around the orb of energy. Lightning surged through his bones as he clenched it tightly. His eyes burned with fury as he swore inwardly that those who wronged him would apologize in hell. The system chimed, progress complete, 100%. The golden energy erupted violently, swallowing the entire chamber in blinding radiance as Subaru groaned through his exhaustion. He muttered weakly that the ordeal was finally over. A cascade of system messages filled the air. Micromeridian purification completed. Magic amplification increased. Skill activation speed improved. All core stats rose by 2. Subaru scowled at the messages through heavy breaths, complaining to himself that one more blast and he would have died for sure, irritated that the system had kept quiet until the very end. His legs gave out. Subaru collapsed onto his back on the fractured ground, drained of all strength, while the final notification echoed through the glowing chamber that the 6th stage, the legend is cleared successfully. In the offices of Suiton Entertainment, the manager sat rigidly before the screen, watching the live broadcast with knitted brows. Subaru's health bar was dropping violently, and the manager muttered under his breath that the boy was pushing himself far beyond any sane limit. With a frustrated tap of his finger against the desk, he sighed and concluded regretfully that Subaru clearly wasn't suited for the streaming world. His phone rang sharply. On the other end, Hawkeye burst in with breathless excitement, demanding if the manager had just seen Narukami's stream, and calling it absolute insanity. The manager asked him to slow down and explain the reason behind such enthusiasm, only for Hawkeye to proclaim with unwavering certainty that a true star was emerging. Leaning comfortably back, Hawkeye explained that Subaru wasn't just going to succeed as a broadcaster. He would thrive as a player at the same time. Hawkeye admitted that even the original Narukami Subaru had always been more of a warrior than a content creator, and that the viewers seemed to gravitate toward this version, a successor who resembled the original legend more than anyone else. The manager listened in disbelief as Hawkeye declared that they were witnessing something rare. The birth of a new Narukami Subaru, not a copy, but a successor forged in real time before the eyes of the whole tower. Back on the stream, Subaru finally managed to push himself upright. Messages flooded the chat, viewers astonished that he survived and recovered so quickly. Subaru rubbed his aching head and cursed the exhaustion eating through his limbs. When he checked his status window, his fatigue had already dropped to 81, and he exhaled with relief because the higher his stats rose, the faster his recovery seemed to become. Even the last brutal hit hadn't ruined the outcome. Mission completion notifications scrolled upward, adding bits of money from viewers until Subaru's total balance reached 20,420 credits. He nodded, thinking it wasn't bad, until he opened the skill shop and saw the next upgrade for Wedge of Greed demanded 40,000 credits. What he had wasn't even half of that. But if he defeated the giant waiting outside, that amount might become reachable. Subaru turned toward the golden sphere resting in his palm. This was the weapon he earned. As he inspected it, its identity window revealed itself. The lightning spear, a legendary relic forged from a primordial bolt, a weapon capable of one devastating attack before vanishing. Subaru stared at it in disbelief, shocked that something with such rarity could appear at this level. It didn't resemble a spear now, but he knew high-grade equipment often altered its form depending on circumstances. Viewers in the chat asked curiously how he knew so much about top-tier loot. Subaru ignored them, tightening his grip on the shimmering orb. He made up his mind and began walking toward the exit, stating in a firm voice that it was time to end the threat outside. Beyond the mountain, Pellis was on the verge of collapse, drenched in sweat as he stared upward. A colossal shadow engulfed the battlefield. A single enormous eye gazed down at them, radiating an oppressive force that made Dale gasp aloud. The monster raised its head, and the system announced its true identity. Giant King Greg, the seed who devoured thunder. A nightmarish giant with a demonic face roared, shaking the ground. One of the warriors snapped completely. Laughing like a madman, he sprinted away from the group. Pellis shouted after him, baffled by the sudden breakdown. The man turned back with tears streaking his face, yelling that none of them understood what they were facing. He ran straight toward the giant, dropped to his knees, and pressed his forehead to the dirt, pleading for mercy. The giant glared down at him. When the warrior called him God, the giant's expression twisted with fury. He bellowed in disgust, outraged at being likened to the weak creatures around him. Dale rushed forward, grabbing the trembling man by the shoulders, shouting at him to come to his senses. He dragged him backward and yelled at the others to run. But the words froze in his throat. Pellis screamed Dale's name as the giant's massive hand smashed into the very spot Dale had been standing. The earth burst open, dust exploding outward. Pellis stood paralyzed as the truth sank into him. There was no victory here, and now he saw clearly there was no escape either. An entire legion of giants had encircled the village, closing them inside a massive ring of death. Driven by desperation and fear, Pellis snapped. He shouted toward the towering King Greg, claiming he knew who had killed the giant's son and that he could tell the truth. Anything, any lie that might buy him one more breath of life. The giant king halted mid-stride and lowered his enormous head toward Pellis, his voice vibrating with threat as he demanded the killer's identity. Pellis raised his shaking sword and pointed into the distance, forcing out a lie, that the human who murdered the giant's son had fled in that direction to gather strength for a second attack. Inwardly, he prayed the monster would swallow the lie and move away. But the giant king stepped closer, his expression twisting into something nightmarish. "You're lying," he growled. His luminous eyes bored straight into Pellis's soul, easily peeling apart truth from falsehood. He leaned in, asking with cold precision whether the true killer wasn't actually standing right here. Pellis's knees nearly gave out as the giant continued interrogating him, asking whether he had just pointed his pitiful blade randomly in blind hope. Before Pellis could utter another trembling excuse, a violent surge of lightning erupted above the mountain behind them. Both he and the giant snapped their attention toward the peak. A bolt of golden thunder slammed into the mountaintop so fiercely that the ground quaked beneath their feet. Pellis's face drained of color. With a voice caught between awe and desperation, he whispered toward the heavens. "A savior, please still be there." High above, atop the cliff overlooking the battlefield, a cold system message unfurled. "A seventh stage, lightning start." Subaru stood on the precipice, gazing down at the chaos below. He told himself quietly that this was the final wall he had to break. The live chat exploded in astonishment as the viewers caught sight of the colossal monster, insisting this could not possibly still be a second-floor test and urging him to run. But Subaru already knew the truth. Running wasn't even a consideration. The only path forward was through the giant. He clenched the glowing orb in his hand, acknowledging that a direct clash was suicide. Against something of that scale, he had only one chance, one strike, one clean hit before the monster could react. He raised his arm and activated the lightning spear. Sparks whipped around him violently as the golden ray surged upward, splitting the gray clouds. Energy gathered slowly but with unbearable intensity. At just 10% activation, Subaru's fatigue spiked to 84, and his muscles convulsed as though tearing apart from within. Even with Wedge of Greed Level 3 absorbing some of the blowback, the system reported failure after failure as the power continued building. At 33%, the pressure doubled, and his fatigue rose to 88, blood trickling from both his palm and beneath the mask. Subaru clenched his teeth, realizing grimly that his mastery was far too low to wield a relic of this magnitude safely. Yet with the spear crossing 50%, he no longer had the luxury of turning back. The viewers spammed concerned messages, calling this torment a loop of misery ever since he picked up lightning. But Subaru shut out the chat entirely. He had no room in his mind for anything but surviving the next few seconds. Below, the giant king noticed the growing beacon overhead. Even the viewers joked that someone would have to be blind not to see such a ridiculous pillar of light. Subaru silently agreed. After channeling this much energy, hiding was impossible. At 78.5% activation, the giant rotated slowly, glaring up at the mountain peak. His monstrous eye locked directly onto Subaru. A deep, venomous whisper left his lips. "You are the one who killed my son." His expression contorted into pure hatred, and the giant king began marching toward the mountain, each colossal step shaking the earth as he advanced straight towards Subaru.